I call this meeting of the Operations Committee to order. Item 2 is discussion and possible consensus on the 2019-2020 budget. And we will start, as we always have, with the sustained budget, which begins on in section 4 of your budget folder.
Actually, if we can, we're going to start with just a quick update.
Okay.
Like
We'll start with a quick update from Dr. Menzo.
What we'd like to do is, and you have this presentation in front of you, the updated PowerPoint presentation for tonight, the budget workshop one. So everybody should have a document that looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted, these were some of the clarifying questions that we've received. These are the ones that were most common. So we just wanted to go through some of these clarifying questions. This will go up on the internet as all of our documents due tomorrow for parents, and then there'll be another email going out to families on Friday. Tomorrow I'm sending out an email to families about an update on the facility study, our meeting on March 11th, so I wanted to have that go out, and then there'll be an email blast going out on Friday, again, updating them on the most recent budget meeting of today. And then next week we do the same thing, so we keep those lines of communication open on a continual basis by keeping everything public on the budget on our website. So when we look at it first, and I'm going to move over here because I don't want to block people, so I'll go stand actually. So when we look at this, there are a couple of questions regarding some of the recommendations in the budget. So the first one is, can you explain the role of the communication specialist? In our strategic plan, we had presented a part-time communication specialist. What we look at this person, the responsibilities for this person would be include but not limited to the idea that they would communicate to the public on behalf of Wallingford Public Schools through social media, write and publish press releases, attend and report on local events and sponsored meetings, and act as spokesperson for the Board of Ed as authorized. The superintendent I would still be the official spokesperson, but this person would help navigate some of the media and press information that is requested of us. This person could also act as, depending on the number of hours that we are able to, if we were able to procure this individual position, this person could also provide some additional resources for engaging parents and work with parents to help us better engage parents at all levels, not just special populations, but it could be all students. So we could look at some of our special education opportunities, but we could also look at our EL parents, and then just in general with the initiatives that are going on in the district. So I just wanted to offer that clarification because that was a question that has come up. Can you explain the role of the grant writer and what other districts have grant writers? So the role of the grant writer would basically be to locate and identify grants for which the district may be eligible, which we are presently doing. But again, having a designated person, either a full-time person, hourly person, or we could go out to RFP and actually have a person that would receive the position and their salary would be based off of successfully writing grants. That's one alternative that I wanted to put forth. We wanted to put the money in the budget, but in my previous districts that I've worked in, what we've done is we put out and we're able to provide administrative, in the grant you could write an administrative line item, and if you get the grant, that's what the person would receive for writing the grant. So it's something for us to consider. But they would research, they would identify, they would collect the necessary data. Writing grants, if you haven't written one before, there's a tremendous amount of research that has to go in grants. A lot of demographic information. Once you do it, it's good to keep it in a repository. However, it changes and requirements change depending on if you're writing a federal grant, state grant, or foundation grants. And then coordinating the writing of the grant with district personnel. When you write a grant, one of the key things, as many of you know, writing a grant, you want to have one voice in a grant. You don't want the grant to sound like it's been written by 5 people. That does not bode well for you in the review process. So you really want to have that consistent voice, and that's what this person would help us with, is to have that consistent voice. And then submit grants in a timely manner for consideration. The districts that we are able to find that presently have grant writers are listed here. We did put out on a listserv information. We know there are many more districts. Most of your alliance districts, your urban districts, have grant writers. I know when I was in Willimantic, we had a grant writer. So right now, these are districts: Ansonia, Meriden, Hamden, Stafford, which is a small district, Stamford, Torrington, and Vernon. All were the ones that responded to our initial survey of information. Yeah.
Would this person only write the grant, or would they also be involved in reporting back on the grant?
This would be, what we're looking at this point would be just the person to write the grant for a department. So say they were writing a grant for science. They would work with the science management team, the science curriculum coordinator, and then the person who is responsible for that area would be the responsible party to actually report out on it and do the timely project updates. And that is why, and I'll say this at this point, because just in case people didn't hear me before, Mr. Barone, our business manager, is not here tonight because of a federal grant that I wrote this summer that we all know we received from the Department of Justice in Washington. He's in Washington learning the accountability measures that we have to meet the benchmarks of the grant. So that's a requirement that he had to be there. That part of the government is open. So he's at that tonight for 2 days in Washington because we have our first report due come February. So he had to be there for that.
This grant writer, though, was for the following year's budget, correct?
Yes, but there were some questions about it that were asked from this year.
So this is for you want this for 2021?
Yes, we were looking at 2021. It's something, though, that again, I think based on, and it was a good question that we wanted to be brought forward because based on some different ways of funding it, like I had mentioned, if we go out to an RFP, we could potentially put out an RFP where the actual funding of this is not from the Board of Education, but it's from the successful awarding of grants. And there are people who do this, they're retired people often, that have done this in their past lives or past experience, professional experience, that don't mind because you can get between, depending on the size of the grant, sometimes you could build into it 10 to 20% or 10 to 15% of the overall grant award. And that could be used in part to help defer the expense of that person writing the grant. So it's something for us to investigate. It's not something that's in the immediate budget for 1920, but it doesn't mean that we can't. I wanted to just bring this to the board's attention because it's not something that we are precluded from at least advertising this year and seeing what happens. So another question was about the Dean of Students. We had brought this forward last year as well. And some of the roles of the Dean of Students, as we had talked about in the past, to assist, it's really to help the principal. We chose not to call it an assistant principal because it was going to be a different classification in the administrator contract because we saw it as not similar to an assistant principals like other districts. And I know there's a sheet, we gave you information in your packet tonight of other districts that have assistant principals. So it's a little different. We saw this as a position, and the reason why we kept it a little different was we saw this as a position that would be a good springboard for some of our staff that might have just recently required their O92, and we're looking to mature into a full-fledged leadership role in a school. So it's in between what we would call lead teacher at some schools, and I know when we've interviewed for administrators, we've heard people be lead teachers. They teach a little bit, and they also lead a school, or they help lead a school. It's between that and an assistant principal. So these people would not teach, but they would assist the principals. And what we have in the budget this year would be for 2, and as a strategic plan item. I will be very honest, and I know that we have one of our principals here tonight, Christina Sagnella, and we have other administrators here tonight in different areas. We were very candid with our administrators at our central office meeting yesterday that we value this idea, but we also understand the economic circumstances. And we understand that this, while we did put it forth, we felt we needed to honor and respect our administrators and their desires for additional support. But we also, as the leaders of the district, if you notice on our strategic plan prioritization, it wasn't at the top where it was last year. And that is because of the fact that the board saw fit to add the psychologist and social worker, depending on the schools, at the elementary level. And we do see this, and they do see that as a support. But we didn't want to lose track of this. But we do understand that this is a potential difficult item to move forward. So I just wanted to clearly state that this evening.
Mrs.
Oh, sorry,
Purcell has a
sorry.
question.
No, I just had a couple questions on that.
Yeah.
So you're thinking two, so they would travel between buildings, or would they be in one building?
They would travel, again, it's probably one on one side of town, one on the other.
Okay.
And again, when you think of two, and this was the other part of it, is in reality, that's not a lot of time at each school.
Right.
So that's the other challenge with this concept. And so, but we didn't want to lose it, because we do feel it's important to keep raising the level of understanding that our administrators do a tremendous amount at each building, and that there is still growing need. But again, we understand the complications.
And then my other question, I have a couple more, sorry,
Sure.
on this. One is, so it's not an administrative position, it's still teacher
No, it would be
union? Or
no,
is
it is an administrative position.
It is an administration?
Yes.
Okay. Then I think that takes care of my second question.
Mr. Votto?
I know I should have sent this in to you earlier.
No, it's okay.
But this now just raised another question for me. Would you say all of our elementary schools, or a good percentage of them, have teachers who had their 092s?
Yes, they do.
All right, so
Yeah.
you would think almost all of them probably?
For the most part, yes. And those are the teachers that we put on if an administrator is not in the building. They're the person that will be in charge of the building, as well as the sister school principal is always on call.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
do have one more question.
Mrs. Purcell?
Sorry. If this isn't something we could fund, has it been talked about, the idea of doing internships with some of our teachers that have the 092 to be able to assist in some of these?
I
areas?
think that there's already some work in that area where the buildings do look for informal leadership opportunities. I think that, again, what we're looking at for some of these areas would require an 092 to be, because to chair a PPT or a 504 meeting or to be part of those things, you do have to have an administrator.
Maybe I didn't make myself clear, sorry. I assumed it was an 092 situation, but years ago, we used to have where at Yalesville, there'd be someone who would be an internship for a year.
That's just as expensive, to be honest. That's actually what
okay.
you get, because you're taking a teacher offline.
Right.
So on average, the teacher would be making around $90,000 to $92,000 a year plus benefits. So the cost differential between this and actually having a full-time person that you could do everything with versus a teacher offline like you did in the past, the cost differential is maybe $10,000 to $12,000, which you're going to get a lot.
So
It's a
2 administrators for this would be the same as taking 2 teachers offline?
well, one teacher offline is $92,000 plus benefits, so $112,000 if it's a family.
Okay.
So that's almost what this, I don't remember the exact budget number for this one,
Okay.
but I want to say that we were talking maybe the differential, and I'll look it up when I get to my seat, but you're talking a differential of maybe $12,000 for a full-time person.
Okay.
That, I mean, again, you're saving, yes, if you did the teacher in residence, quote unquote, you're saving $24,000, but you're also then having to incur the expense of the substitute.
Right.
So now you have a full-time substitute, so the actual differential cost, the savings, is nominal.
Okay. Thank you.
We had looked at that a few years back, and that's why it was brought up.
Okay.
What is the cause in the textbook, or what is the cause of, it should be, the textbook decrease in funding? Basically, the cause for the decrease that you see this year is that we're anticipating using unencumbered funds coming to you like we have in the past, like we've done, because it makes more sense to buy them in the prior year if we have those funds available, which right now we're forecasting close to or a little over $700,000, because we haven't touched the contingency yet because of the large contingency due to the settlement agreements for the contracts that we're negotiating. But we believe that we're going to be able to isolate enough funds, and we've worked really closely, obviously, with Carrie Latour, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, to identify the fact that we should be able to identify those funds and unencumbered funds to purchase the textbooks. So that's why there's that reduction. We didn't want to unnecessarily budget for something that we wouldn't need the funds for. How many retirements are we projecting? We have 9 teachers, 1 administrator, and 2 paraeducators. That's what we're projecting. The medical careers and certified nursing position. So what this would do is the CNA teachers, many of you know this, they each have 10 students in their classrooms. That's based on the guidelines for the program, because those students, they work an A-B schedule, so the teachers teach on one day, and they're out doing clinical with the students on the other day. So if we added an additional teacher in our medical careers program, there would be 10 additional students that could be in CNA, but then there could be an additional 50 students that could be in other classes, like we had suggested would be medical terminology and record keeping. This, again, we know it's a reach for us because of the fact that, you know, it's a new staff position. So we did put it as our strategic plan item number 1. We do have the classroom space because when we had strategically planned the setting at Sheehan High School, the space that was the former business office was always designated as the 3rd classroom in the medical suite if we were to go in that direction. Information about assistive technology. This was a question that came up a few times. We do have an assistive technology team that started last year. We know that we continue to evolve in our approach to this, and the team does provide resources or tries to allocate resources for students who have been determined to need those resources based on a PPT process. There has been professional development for the team. However, we know that this is an area that we continue to need to do more in, and we are developing a professional development plan. We're actually working with a variety of outside resources, looking at consultants in this area to help us develop a plan that we could have in place come the fall. So right now, this was always intended to kind of be a multi-step process. Last year was forming the team, getting the team trained. This year, trying to have that team train others. But now what we need to do is take that to the next level. We've been in consultation with CERC as well as other outside organizations to see whether or not they could help us take it to the next step in that plan. Another question was about co-teaching for special education, and that's why if you have additional special ed questions, I invited Donna Curtis, our elementary coordinator, and also Lisa Baker, our middle school, high school coordinator here tonight. I figured they're the true experts. I'm just sharing this information. But the question was, where do we co-teach? Where is co-teaching occurring, and how does co-teaching work in our district? At the middle school and high school is predominantly where co-teaching is occurring. Traditional co-teaching, where the special education teacher would be assigned to a general education teacher's classroom to work together. In our elementary school, it's a hybrid. It's a little push-in, it's a little pull-out. Sometimes elementary special ed teachers are there for a part of the time, not the whole time. So it's much more flexible. The high school, it's more of what we would say is a traditional model for co-teaching, except in our specialized programs. Those are a little different. The way it works is special education teachers do develop and deliver specialized instruction on an individual basis, but not for every special education student. So sometimes the special education teachers, because in the co-teaching model, they might be the ones delivering the instruction. Sometimes it's the classroom teacher. And that's when it's the way it's supposed to work. There's supposed to be that give and take. It's not supposed to be just one person doing everything. The tough part with co-teaching, as we find, is that the planning time for the general education teacher and the special education teacher to be able to meet and plan appropriately for the class, that's often the most difficult. So we are reviewing this process and we're assessing it. And again, we're looking at different models. Actually, one of the things that we're looking at with CERC, and we just set up a meeting that we're looking, because CERC is the Special Education Resource Center, and so we're looking at getting them to provide us some information not only on some co-teaching but also on the use of paraprofessionals, because we want to make sure that we're continuing to evolve in what's best practice.
Do I have to be acknowledged by her?
Oh, sorry, Mr.
All
Vara.
right.
I couldn't see you.
Oh, you're on.
What was my question now? Okay. I know it's difficult for regular ed for special ed teachers, probably both ways,
It's both.
for a special ed teacher to get into the role of teaching, say, psychology or whatever, which is what the co-teaching is all about. Do they have time, the co-teachers, to come together to plan lessons or to go over what today's lesson should be, or next week's unit, or something like that?
I think that in some instances, there's more time than others, and I think that, as I said, that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I always, I'm not a big proponent of co-teaching. I like the inclusive way better, because people have their specialties, and sometimes you're asking somebody to do something that they're just not comfortable with.
Well, I think
So I'm
what's
glad you say you're looking at this.
Well, and I think what's been great this year, we've been doing the walkthroughs at the middle schools and the high schools. And again, those are two areas that have the co-teaching. And they also have different uses for how they use their paraeducators at those levels. So we've been having some very thoughtful conversation with our administrators, and they've been having it with their staff or their cabinet, which would be including their department heads, to kind of talk about what is the best value, what's going to be the best return to the student on the adults that we have in our organization. Not saying that we're reducing them, but how do we utilize the time with those individuals? Is having a co-teaching scenario in a high-level class, because some of our students, obviously with special needs, there are students who are able to perform very successfully in a high-level class. Is having a special ed teacher there trying to co-teach a physics class really going to be effective? You know, and not that I'm saying we're doing it that, I'm just using that as just an example, but I think it kind of coincides with your question. Or would it be better to have that person during that time be used differently? So it's just really that it's part of our walkthrough process, and I have to say all the administrators have been phenomenal. We had a really good conversation about this last week at our high school walkthroughs that we did at Sheehan.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Castelli?
So what is the criteria that determines when the classroom teacher, the non-special ed teacher?
The general education
The general,
teacher.
thank you. What's the criteria to determine that the general ed teacher is in need of a co-teacher? In other
Well,
words,
it's
is there a
not
number
about
of
the general ed
students?
teacher. This is not about the adults,
I mean,
it's
is
about
it
the
number of
students.
That's what I'm saying. but
It's
is it-
not the number of students, it's about
It's
the
not.
needs of the students in the
Okay, got
classroom.
it, okay.
So it's not because you have 24 students that you get a co-teaching model.
Yep.
It's about the needs of the students. And in reality, that's where we also, and we've been doing some work on this, is really talking to our staff about how you write an IEP and where are the needs? Where are the identified areas of growth for that individual student? And is co-teaching necessary? Is there a different way of getting at supporting that student's needs? Does it need to be in every classroom? Is our accommodations, because part of an IEP are the accommodations for a student, are those just blanket for every class? Or are those, because the child might have a deficiency in processing, are those only necessary in certain classes? And so it's a process that we have to continue to work on, and that's part of what we're doing when we look at, we're developing or revising with both Donna Curtis and Lisa Baker, myself, Carrie, Danielle are working on revising our PPT checklist. So when a parent goes into a PPT and there's staff there, that we're making sure that we're really doing our due diligence as a district. So looking at some state documents, reviewing that, and in that process, you'll get at the answer to the question you just had. Is it really in the best interest of the student? Is it something that's appropriate for the student?
So then a follow-up to that is,
Sure.
it sounds to me then that there's the feasibility that one special ed teacher could potentially be working with multiple general ed teachers.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Most of them are. They're working across content areas. So that goes back to Mr. Votto's question, that it makes it sometimes difficult because now a special educator potentially needs to be an expert in multiple classes at a high school or middle school level, which is challenging for anyone.
And the other way around, too.
And vice versa, yep. 1% account, there was just a question about this, about used for and reserved. So the 1%, just to remind everybody, is that there's a new 1% account established each year. And it does not lapse, meaning that it continues. If we go out to bid on certain items, so like this year we had a certain amount in our 1% account, we go out to bid. Sometimes because of bid process, we are not able to do the work within this school year, immediately the following school year. That doesn't go away. That means that we can still use it. 2 years ago, or last year, we went to the town council in the fall of last year of the 17-18 school year, and we asked to carry over the $700,000 towards special education. That is still in that that is still in that 1% account designated for special education needs if we had them. Okay, so I think that's a great, I wanted to really bring this one up because I know even I get questions from staff and from parents about it. We're very fortunate. There are districts who have not been afforded this opportunity, even though it's a statutory right of districts as of 2012. So we're very fortunate that our mayor did take the meeting, number one, and number two, did ask the council to put this in place for us.
So can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
So, for that 700,000, if I remember correctly, we put that, we earmarked that for special ed because of last year's state budget.
Correct.
And the concerns that we would be reduced on our funding from the state level, which in fact did not occur.
Correct.
Which is great. Where do you see that money going for special ed? I mean, because that obviously is our goal, and I'm saying this more for the TV than for this room.
Sure.
Is that, we don't really want to allocate that for a recurring expense, but a one-time expense, because it's not sustainable, obviously, over time. Do you guys have ideas about that, or you're
Well,
still sitting tight, not
I think
knowing?
we're still sitting tight because as
Okay.
as we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into the sustained, we're still questioning the reimbursement rate that the state is going to provide us for excess cost. Right now, it looks at 70% potentially, which is a reduction in
Right.
dollars of about a little over $300,000. So we're concerned because we don't know. I mean, the governor hasn't presented his budget. He's
Right.
been given a little bit of extension on that.
Right.
So there's been discussions that special ed from one side of the house or one side of the room that's saying that they want to fund special ed fully. They've been saying that, probably since I was an infant. And then they have the other side that they're going to cut it additionally. So we don't know. It's too soon to tell.
Yeah.
I think I would suggest that we give it another year.
Okay,
or at
that's
least
where-
till the end of the year.
That's where my next
to
question was.
determine where we are, because remember, this will be that we'll have multiple years of budgets to understand
Right.
where we're going to fall. If we did need the money, it wouldn't be for one-time expenditures, unfortunately, because special ed is not always
Right.
a one-time expenditure. But we did also talk about last spring when we talked about some of the facility needs, that if at some point we felt that we could release some of those funds, we certainly have many facility needs that we could accomplish.
So that we're not locked per se for special ed. I mean, that
No,
was our
the-
original intent, and that's
Exactly.
and that
What
is
we
our
would
ultimate
just-
goal.
What we would have to do is just go to the town council,
Yep,
and we would have to ask them to rename the account.
gotcha. Thank you.
And we could do that on an annual basis.
Yep.
Mrs. Corso?
First, sorry, I was late, a couple minutes late tonight. Are there 1% accounts prior to that one that's allocated for special ed?
Yes,
And how much are in our
we can give you
1% accounts?
we can give you a full
Do
counting.
you know how many there are?
We started. I want to say we started in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. But we can get you that data. Most of them have been expended fully. We've actually over the years we've gone to the board has been aware of this. We've asked for transfers because sometimes you'll go out to bid and like a truck will come in like $1,200 less. So we'll have like little accounts. We'll have 1,200 here, 500 here, and we'll ask for them to be combined and do another project off the strategic plan. So we look at those. We try to look at them quarterly. We meet. Actually, the business manager Dominic would meet with Jim Bowes because they're town accounts. So we have to make sure that in the auditing process we're accounting for those accounts, because you don't want to keep those open for too many years, because then the auditors, it gives them a little bit of a red flag. But we can get you those years.
And just what they're named, so what they're currently allocated for would be
Yeah,
helpful.
we have that's all in the Munis system. So they're all, some of them are, what we've learned though, and I think we shared this with you all last year, is that and this has been a recommendation of Mr. Bowes, is that we were so ultra specific when we first started this. Like we said, one truck for this, one truck for that. It was too specific because then we didn't have the ability to use the funds in a more broadly based way. Still, with the spirit of the count, but it doesn't give you that leeway. So like this past year, we put money for security items, and we purposely, and I think we discussed it, we left it broad because we didn't know if we were going to get a grant. So like if I had called out Silex, we would have been stuck to have to go change that money because we got the grant to fund it. Or not Silex, excuse me, Securely. So, but we'll get those accountings, we get those reports on actually a monthly basis. All right. How many employees are not eligible to join a union? This was a question. So we have 291 employees not eligible to join a union. These employees are comprised of central office administration, so myself, Dominic, Carrie, and Danielle are not in unions. There's also the athletic coaches, because they're part-time employees. And then permanent part-time and full-time employees are the security, greeters, lunch recess aides, part-time clerks, certified nursing assistants at the schools, college and career specialists, and my administrative assistant, as many of the board members recall, is not in a union because she's a confidential secretary under state statute. And then adult education tutors and per diem teachers. They do not, these numbers do not include those who don't work on a consistent basis. So how did facility study impact the budget process? This one is going to be a multi-week discussion because we want to make sure that we provide you the updated information. So Mark and his staff is working on a chart that's going to update this financially for you. But basically, this is really something that's in flux because we don't know where we're going to be with the facility study. So the items included in the strategic plan budget have been determined to be the necessary to be completed prior to the potential 5 to 10 years. Because if we're looking at, we keep saying that it's going to take us, and the consultants say it's going to take us between 5, 7 to 10 years. There are some items in the strategic plan at the 4 schools that have to be done in order for us to either maintain certification, say of oil tanks or other equipment, or that are just in a situation where it's a safety issue or other challenges. So what Mark is doing with his staff is we're taking a closer look at that, and I know there was a draft that was sent. Oop, I can't believe this. I had this on for the weather again. Oh, that's not good. Daniel. Actually, I'm just going to, excuse me one second. I apologize. So the thing is that the items again in the budget, in the strategic plan budget, were things that we felt, Mark felt, had to be done within this period of time in order for us to maintain the buildings at an appropriate level. But we will clarify that in numbers, dollars and cents for all of you as we move forward. Yep.
Would that include like the lockers over at the DAG?
Lockers, Mark, you could respond to this.
That's something that could be put off to building renovation. That's certainly not something that we have to do prior to that.
The balance that we have to weigh in this, and Ray, you bring up a really good conversation. We had a very thoughtful conversation today at Central Office that we want to be cautious that some things like a locker, which would be considered a furniture, fixture, and equipment in a renovation project, that we don't take on too much with town money ahead of time when we can then void our 51% reimbursement. So it's one of those tough ones. So we're trying to look at it with a lot of scrutiny on this.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. The oil tank replacements, this was the question of the day. So we're happy to say that we made a mistake. So the thing is, the oil tanks, they were double budgeted, and so we apologize for that. So they were in the bondable list. We're going with the word is bondable, that they're items that the mayor has bonded for us in the past. So the good news is that our budget number bottom line changes tonight. And these were the ones that need to be replaced due to the fact that there are, we have regulations by the state of Connecticut that we have to stay within those regulations. So that was a key thing, is that these particular 5 oil tanks have to be replaced under the guidelines, state guidelines. But they are all in the bondable column. They shouldn't have been in the strategic plan, so those are coming off. So we have adjusted numbers, and I think you saw them tonight. We gave you some pages, but I also have them at the last slide of this too, so you'll have that. We also had another opportunity to give back, and we thank a board member who brought this to our attention. Last spring, you all agreed to provide some allocation of the unencumbered funds for convection steamers, ovens, and warmers. That money has been allocated to food service. The challenge was, and this is where there was a little confusion, we didn't purchase them yet because one of the bids got kicked back. So we don't see them yet, but we all know the purchasing process. We have to follow strict guidelines. So the money's already allocated. These can also be taken off of the strategic plan budget, which was a good news item. So they will be done this year. It's just that we have to go back out to bid according to, because some of the items that you had agreed to already have been done, but we have to go back and fix the other ones.
So you're saying these 3 things will be taken off?
They were, yes.
They were already off.
We took them off today. The adjusted items that you have show that they've been taken off. So with that said, the new bottom line, the sustained does not change, but the strategic plan does. So basically, the overall bottom line has now dropped. If we were to do this, if you were to approve the sustained and strategic, which we understand that that is not traditional, and I'll go on record that while even the Record Journal says that that was the budget that we really presented a 2.4, but I know that 5.7 is much more excitable to readers than a 2.4 when we were the lowest budget as a 2.4 than any other district in the area. But a 5.7 was higher than the other districts, so it made a better story. We understand that. But tonight, we're saying that, again, with the adjustments on the strategic plan, it's a combined 5.18, which actually is closer to the other surrounding towns and their budgets, and those were sustained, not strategic. So we're getting closer, but again, we understand that's if you did all of the strategic plan items. You'll notice in your documents that you received tonight, you had a prioritization list, which is going to be posted. The revised one will be posted on the internet tomorrow for parents also. That one brings the overall strategic, the top 30, or the top number of items. That brings it down to, I think, a 3.41. Roxanne, it's in that packet that it actually says it right on it. There's a cover page. If you read the cover sheet.
Replacement pages for budget book? Is
Yep,
that it?
and then the last one is prioritization.
Oh, yeah.
Those only 1 through 25 now?
Yeah, so we're down to 25 items because of the fact that the oil tanks were removed, and then there were 3 items that were removed for food services. So the new combined strategic plan budget with the priorities, I believe, is a 3.41. We did it in black and white because we didn't want to put the color. We apologize. But we just didn't want to spend the ink.
We didn't want to
Sorry.
spend the money,
So I just have to say,
which is good.
because of the presentation that we did a week ago, and the grays, that you can't tell which gray is which gray, I literally went out to the website and and wrote in my book what
The colors.
Right. So honestly, it's one little section of the whole budget. I really think, we could
One color page.
have color, yes.
I know. We understand. We understand. We just try to be frugal, and we don't have a color copier at central office either, so, no. I know we have a lot in everybody, but we don't have a color copier. And we appreciate everything we have, but we don't have a color copier. So that's where, this was just kind of catching everybody up. I do this at the beginning of every workshop because other questions will arise of importance that we want to make sure. So again, this presentation will be on the website for all families. We also have copies over here if there are people in the audience who would like a copy. We do have extra copies. And then this will also be sent out to all families. We'll keeping them posted on a regular basis, as we always do, for the budget process.
So we should really take these pages and put them in the book then.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah. We also have other questions that were posed to the administration that
Yeah,
are
the-
in a packet.
if
at
I could
your-
just explain the replacement pages. The
Mhm.
replacement
Yeah.
pages, number one, the replacement page is, there's a page that talks about the 3 years of the strategic plan and the sustained services. That just reflects the changes that I have on the screen. So because there was a reduction in the strategic plan because of the oil tanks being removed, as well as the items at the food services, that's why that number was reduced. So what you'll see is you have a 3-year comparison that's revised. You also have the goal sheets for maintenance. Those are the other ones that you'll see in there that are revised. And then the last one is the prioritization. To be honest, the most important one is the prioritization. The other ones, we just wanted to be, again, transparent that there were the mistakes. We didn't want to try to hide anything. So that's why we provided those those other items with you. The other documents that you have in front of you tonight, I'll just go through, are responses to, I believe, 76 of the 82 questions that were sent to us. So we didn't do badly. We only didn't get to 6, and some came in a little bit after the deadline. So I was
more than 2 days.
I was pleased with my our staff response. So there's the responses to the questions in the packet. I don't know if did everybody see these? Mm-hmm. And then there's also, this is the chart that we had last year, but we revised it. This was the staffing chart that we have given to you in the past with all of the staff, administrative and other staff and responsibilities. We wanted to provide that to you again. Also, it was asked about in questions, so we just wanted to update it. I do want to thank, because before we get started in further discussion, the central office team again, because this is not done by just me. We sit and we put it up on a Google Doc, and we just fill it in, we color code, and we just help each other respond. But this is a real collaborative effort, and I think you all can see this is a lot of work on behalf of getting as much information out as possible.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions about the handouts, we can turn in our budget loose leaves to section 4. And as in the past, we'll go page by page, and if there are questions or clarifications that are needed, we can go through. If not, we'll just, this is kind of a, I'm sure, a review, because everyone else has asked their questions as they went through the book. So we'll start on page 1 of section 4 and see if there are any questions or concerns about page 1. I do have a question. What bargaining units are in negotiations during this upcoming budget?
We will enter into negotiations with teachers. The contract will not be in place until July 1st, 2021, but we'll start negotiations in the fall. And then we also have nurses that are this spring, and we're not certain that they'll be complete prior to the end of the school year. So in terms of negotiation costs, those are the 2 unions that we're planning for.
Thank you.
Yep. If I could just point out, because I want to say again, thank you to our unions, all of our unions. We continue to reduce the waivers. If you notice, the waivers are down another $188,000. So now our actual waiver expenditure for 2019-20 is $289,278. When I got here, I think it was well over $2 million, or well over $1 million. So in a matter of 10 years, we've cut it significantly. So I just want to continue to thank. That's not something that any of us should take lightly. That's significant negotiation, and that's significant concession on the part of the unions. So we do thank all of our bargaining unions for that.
Mrs. McKay?
So looking at page 1, a $50,000 reduction in tutors. How do you, what went behind that?
That was based on reviewing where the funds come from. So we had to do some reallocation there, and then also how we were utilizing tutors. So looking at the use of them and looking at strategically how we were deploying the services. Some of that reduction is that we were providing multiple tutors when we could have consolidated the effort. So it helped us
when
do
you
that.
have, I mean, I think of tutors as, if we have students that are out of, have, for disciplinary reasons, are,
It could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because of a student who has special needs, might have a sudden illness, so it might be a 504.
Okay.
But we're mandated to provide services, so it's a wide range.
so for students that are out of district, so when can you couple up students to be tutored by, in other words, a tutor can tutor multiple students simultaneously, that makes that reduction?
It could sometimes happen with our specialized programming, where we can match up students. Really, where the savings was that we had people doing multiple content areas at multiple times. So it was basically trying to refine that schedule
Okay.
and look at that more closely.
Thank you.
Other questions on page 1? Okay, we can move on to page 2.
I just would like to draw the paraeducators. There was a question that was presented to us regarding the reduction of some outside services. One of our outside services account was reduced significantly, and the question was, did we cut services to students? We didn't. We actually hired paraeducators, so that's why this line item for paraeducators went up $281,000. So where that other account was reduced, approximately, I think it was a little over $300,000, that was a contracted service, so we also went out to bid. Remember, that was our CBH contract, which now we're with Delta T. So the negotiated price for some of the BTs was reduced. And in addition, we didn't hire, based on consultation with our paraeducators and our administrators, we found that oftentimes our paraeducators that we hired were more effective than some of the outside services. So we ended up bringing back paraprofessional positions and reducing some of the other outside services. So the money wasn't cut, the services weren't reduced in those areas. The services moved to paras. Now, we did have an OT position that was reduced. That was based on a recommendation of our Director of Special Education. Those numbers are always in flux. So presently, we're looking at that. I know Don and I were discussing this, that we might need to add back some OT time, but it's premature because we haven't gotten to our annual reviews. So we're not going to prematurely add something back because you never know if a family leaves that has a lot of OT hours for their child, that might free up time for another individual. So we are looking at our caseloads in that area very closely.
Mrs. Raccio?
So I'm probably confused between the BCBAs and the BTs. And
We didn't cut any
But
BCBAs. All of our
we flipped, right? So when we brought in the extra school psychologists, we took something that was outsourced and we brought it in-house. So I guess I missed the para piece.
No, the BTs are behavioral technicians. They receive support. I'm just sharing. I know you know this, but public might not. So
Yep,
they're
no, help me.
they're paraeducators basically that also go into a series of coursework to take them to a different level to do discrete trials and other opportunities. So what we did was, because we felt that the quality that we were receiving of BTs, working with our staff, our paraeducators could do the same, if not better. And I know we have a paraeducator in the audience tonight who could attest to that. That's where we shifted those. Our BCBAs, we didn't reduce any BCBAs. BCBAs are board certified behavior analysts. We actually hired one as a district.
That's
So
what I remembered.
we have one. So that's on our teaching staff. That person's on our teaching staff. So we still have BCBAs that are consulting with our STARS program at Stevens, our K2 STARS autism program or special needs program there, as well as our 3-5 program. We also have BCBAs that are BCBA that consults at our integrated preschool program. And then we have BCBA that consults at our middle school and high school programs. Those are contracted services. Those didn't go away. There was just a change in company. But then we also hired our own.
All right.
So we wanted to really listen to our staff because oftentimes with contracted services, it sounds great, but if your quality is not there and if the people aren't showing up, that makes it very difficult. And our paraeducators are very committed to our students.
I'd rather, yeah, keep it
So
in-house anyway.
that's where we were.
Okay, thank you, that helps.
Yeah, no worries. Anything else?
Other questions on page 2? Seeing none, we'll move on to page 3.
Nothing you can control.
No.
There's nothing to talk about here.
Anything else on page 3? Not, we'll move on to page 4.
Field trips, the increase was for,
Mr. Ross has a question.
yes,
What-
in field trips.
There's a decrease,
Oh, that's oh,
a
okay.
decrease of 3920.
Ms.
I
Costelli?
just want to make a clarifying point, more for the public,
Sure.
that field trips aren't what people typically think of as field trips alone. It also includes the getting our kids from athletic to athletic events, correct?
No, that's in the
Doesn't.
athletic budget. That's
So
a
it is
separate
truly
budget.
just field trips?
These are field trips. So basically, for adult education, there's funding there. We do have some preschool funded field trips for our integrated preschool because it's part of special education services. And so those were our key areas. We do also try to offset some expenditures for Nature's Classroom, as you know, the nurse and such, those areas, because that's quite a costly trip. But we have reduced and we've transferred a lot of the cost of field trips over the past several years, because we used to pay for transportation for students' field trips consistently at different levels, and we've reduced that and we've transferred those expenditures, unfortunately, to the families because we had to. So
Okay,
this,
thanks. I was under the impression from years ago that some of the athletic stuff was in there, so.
no, the athletic funds come from
Yeah.
the school's allocations. Am I correct, Tony? Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And the gate fees, because that was a question also that we kind of hear sometimes is, well, why are we spending more money on security? Can't the gate fees cover it? Right now, our ticket prices are on par with our conference, and we actually get questions quite often from parents that they're paying a lot to go to see their kids play games all the time. So it's up to the athletic directors to take their estimated gate fees plus their participation fees, because we still have the participation fee, and then distribute that. So some of it isn't covered by that, so we have to cover it by the Board of Ed.
Mrs. McKay?
But I would assume, I appreciate the comment that we're really transferring the expense of field trips to our families, which is okay, but.
It's a double-edged sword.
I understand that. But I also assume that our principals have discretionary opportunities to help those families that they know they're families that are the
Absolutely.
most vulnerable and accommodate accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just
Absolutely.
think
Yeah,
that's
we-
important to clarify
No, we make
that.
sure, we don't, students are not, all students go on field trips
Right.
regardless of their
You
financial
find a way to
background.
make it work,
Correct.
and make
there's
it as
fundraising for a
Right.
lot of trips, but even students who might not be able to fundraise, we have funds to take care of that.
I just think that's important.
No, I really appreciate you drawing that
people
out.
Yeah, because we don't want to, I don't want the public to think then those students are sitting in a
No.
classroom by themselves when all the rest of the class is going on a field trip and, calling out that stuff. So, thank
No,
you.
thank you.
Mr. Votto?
Dr. Menzo, there's no allocation per school, right? That's just a
Yes, we do have a per pupil out.
127? That's total for field trips, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's not per school allocation
No,
for
I
that.
don't think it's
no.
per school,
Yeah,
but
no.
how is it decided? Maybe I'm not understanding this. In other words, does Parker Farms get X amount of dollars for field trips out of that Or is
It-
it first come, first serve?
No, it's not done that way. These are a
Just
lot of
curious.
program-based field trips.
Those are programs.
These are program-based, and if you notice on here, there's some programs. We have adult ed, we have
I saw
preschool.
that.
And so a lot of they're program-based. What we could do is I'll get,
It's not that important.
okay, because I can get
Not for
the,
the dollar amount.
all right, because I can get you the line items
No,
for
I'm
it.
just curious.
A lot of it does go to 3-5 schools for, Nature's Classroom, because we have the nurse, we have a variety of expenses there. That's an expensive field trip. It's about what do we? Yeah, well, it's, in terms of what we actually expend as a board, we pay for a variety of items.
We will, as a board, pay for the certified nurse fee that each school shares. It's split between the two sides of town. And oftentimes, we're paying for the transportation because it's out-of-state transportation. So, it is dependent on the school, could be anywhere between $3,000 and $4,000 per school to cover all the costs.
Okay.
But the students pay the tuition.
Correct. They pay the camper fee.
Other questions on page 4? Seeing none, we'll move to page 5.
And these are the top items I was just mentioning in terms of the allocation for police and medical. This is because, again, we have to base it off of our history of receipts from the gates and from participation fees. And because of the increased presence that we have to have at events for police, there's no way the gates could cover all of that additional expenditure.
Mr. Ross?
Yeah, where does the money come from to cover the person, the doctor that's at all football games?
The actual trainers are actually part of the sports budget that comes from, the athletic directors do use the gate receipts for that. So based on their budget, that's one of the items that they do. And we go out to bid it on that position according to town purchasing.
No, aren't we required to have an MD at football games for concussion?
No, not an
No?
MD.
No, okay.
No, we have to have the EMT there,
Right.
which we do,
Okay,
but not an MD.
thank you.
Or at hockey either, because that would be another one.
EMTs, that's it.
Yeah, because hockey would be another concussion.
Well,
Soccer, too.
Yeah.
Other questions on page 5? If not, we'll move on to page 6.
I'll just make reference that you'll notice that the air quality was moved from account 490. We just felt it was better served in this account, so that's why there's that increase in this line. It's a new line item, so we didn't want to alarm anybody. But I didn't get any questions from any of you, so I think you all figured that one out. So, but I just figured it's okay.
Let's go to page 7.
And now you'll notice on page 7, 490 goes down $180,000 because that was the air quality. So it's just a wash in that regard.
Oh, Ms. McKay?
Yeah, so could we talk about the custodial cleaning services reduction? That's a nice chunk of change. What are we doing there?
Do you want to take it, or I could take it? It's up to you. Go for it.
There's some savings based on where the contracts came in from what was originally
Okay.
budgeted. Simple.
Oh, okay. So they're actually lowered? They lowered their contract pricing to us?
They didn't lower it, but the bid came in lower than the original budgeted forecast.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to page 8. Why don't we just call out, as we go along? We'll do page 8. There's no questions, we'll just move on to page 9. If anybody doesn't have any burning questions on page 8, we'll move to
Right.
page 9. Oh, no,
'Cause
okay.
I have not flipped through all the answers, so I don't really know if, my questions are answered.
Sure,
It's-
I'll do my
just-
best.
Yeah, no.
I will do
or
my
Point
best.
me to what page it is here, because I have to find mine. I know I asked a question about the magnet school transportation. Do we know how much we pay for the magnet school transportation? I know it looked like we were gonna reduce
We are,
based on the 3-year average, what we're allowed to
Correct.
reduce. And I know enough to be dangerous about this. There's some students that go to New Haven magnet schools that we don't provide the transportation. Does New Haven provide the transportation? for
yes,
those?
those are called host magnet schools.
Okay.
So New Haven's, like Betsy Ross,
Yep.
all those schools, we
Yep.
do not provide transportation for.
So it's my understanding that those schools have like community pickups as opposed to what I'm gonna call our door-to-door service. So I'm wondering if we are continuing to review what our 3-year average is for the magnet schools and they keep dropping, are we gonna have the same number of buses and the same transportation cost? Or will we get to a point that it's more cost-effective to have those community type of pickup ones?
That's what we're recommending right now, is that we have the actual, we reduced our magnet school numbers, which you'll see on the next page.
Yep.
So we did reduce them based on the 3-year average. We sent them the letter, like we always do, indicating that we were going to reduce it. Now we have to determine, because we have open seats, we have to determine where those students are going to come from, which neighborhoods, and then Mary Ann and Transportation will then recalculate the buses based on that, because we have the lottery. So we don't know.
I get it,
You know what I'm saying?
But
So
I don't know if we, I
So
guess
we could,
if
to answer your question,
we
we
were at
could.
60, so that made sense to have 2 to 3 buses all over town.
Correct.
If we're down to whatever the new number will be for, you know, a school, if it's down to 25.
Yep.
Does it make sense to have 3 buses for 25 students? That's kind of
Again,
where I'm going. 'cause-
the challenge is, though, it's demographically speaking. It's geographically speaking, rather. So the thing is, you couldn't have potentially one bus service all the students for Wintergreen, because of if they're coming from all the way on 68
Get it, yeah.
and then have to go all the way over to Wharton Brook, and then the time-wise. So
Is there a shared opportunity between Merritt and Wallingford?
well, Meriden is
They're
is,
eliminating.
is eliminating transportation
They're
totally.
eliminating
Totally.
They
It's in the paper.
All the transportation.
yeah,
They're walking away
which
from Wintergreen.
again, it's an
Missed that article.
Yeah, so, again, we're going to follow the procedures that we've done, that we believe are the right procedures for our students, which is to fill the lottery spaces, look at where they fall geographically, and then work with transportation to see, and there might be routes that can be cut. But again, it's premature, because we have to see if we're even gonna get the kids to apply, since they're still in, you know,
Yeah.
there's still a concern about
Do
where
they
they're
have a
at, where they
school?
are.
I mean, where are they? Do they have a school?
Mrs.
Well,
Castelli
I
can answer
I went
that.
to the ACES
Oh,
meeting last
sorry.
week, so I can, I was gonna tell you, next week, whenever our meeting is.
You can tell
Anyway,
us now.
No, they're looking at Gateway Community right here in North Haven,
Yes.
renting space there.
They did say that in the article.
Yeah, it hasn't been, there's
a
nothing
big
that's been
school.
finalized,
Right.
Right, it's not my own.
so.
It just seems like a lot of buses for a smaller amount of students.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think it's gonna, and to answer your initial question, it's number 79, and it hasn't been answered yet,
Okay,
so.
sorry, I
I think we also have to be careful if you reduce the number of buses, that you don't want kids on the bus too long to do that.
Well, that's,
Right.
and that's, what- and I
Because
think
you
we
have a
all.
lot of traveling to do. you know, from
Exactly.
here to
We-
Hamden and.
It's tough, because, again, it depends on where you are, so while the numbers, because it never falls out the way, it never falls out perfectly, it's not where, and I don't think anybody would be saying this, that a whole neighborhood is gonna go to Wintergreen.
Right.
That would be perfect, I mean, if that were the case, but the fact is, it doesn't fall out that way.
Other questions on page 8? If not, we'll move on to page 9.
There's a big article in the paper. Is that right?
So you could see that we're reducing Wintergreen to 28. And that's based on the most recent 3-year average. Excuse me, yeah. For 19, we had originally budgeted 55 students for 18-19. And now for this year, we're looking at 28, because this actual school year, 18-19, we only have 21 students at Wintergreen. So that's how we're able to get the 3-year average. Because we have to stay, you know, obviously true to that average, according to state statute.
Mhm.
All right, me again.
Yep, no worries.
Mrs. Rossio?
The special ed private outplacements, I'm sorry, I I know I asked the question. It looked like the dollar amount went up much more than the 3% estimated. Oh, wait, here it is. Look at
Yeah, there's,
It was in your original PowerPoint slide 44.
yeah, and I think we did get, I think there was
You
a,
probably answered it somewhere.
yeah, I
here.
think that was there was a response to that. There's a variety of things that factored into that. We do have some changes in student placements. I'm just trying to find which question that was, that I'm responding to it completely, but I know we did respond.
54, okay.
Yeah, I know we responded to it.
Because it's the same number of students, but it was going up 500,000.
Yeah, and again, in some instances, the placements change, and we've had some placement changes. Oftentimes, we also, and I know Lisa and actually Dominic and I sat at his conference table about a month and a half ago, and we went through every single outplacement. And sometimes there'll be a student who will leave our district, but it's almost as if there's just always somebody coming, next, who might have more costly needs that we, of course, have a responsibility to meet. So the 3% that I think you were talking to on page 54, that was the projected amount. That wasn't factored into our budget. That was for the other years.
Okay.
Okay? So the real number was based on what we're looking at for students. But that number, I think we
It's very
kind of,
volatile, I know.
yeah, because
I
I mean,
get
we're so fortunate that our special ed department, I mean, they try, but it's a moving number.
If the state ever sets their unified rates for all districts, it might be easier to budget.
Who knows? We'll see.
Any other questions on page 9?
The other thing was that we do have, I apologize, we have, there are such things as DCF outplacements, and those we get much more reimbursement for. It goes beyond the 4.5 times per pupil expenditure. And when those age out, or they no longer are a DCF case and they still are in our books, we lose money in that regard. So if we have a student who's placed in Wallingford because they're a special ed student and it's a DCF decision, we received a higher reimbursement rate for those students. And then once it's released and they're still in our district, the difference in cost gets transferred back to the district. Okay? I wrote that down as a note, and I wanted to make sure I shared that.
Okay, thank you.
It's just another nuance of the funding mechanism.
Okay, Mrs. Corso.
The decrease in the state agency placement reimbursement is going down to 70% of eligible. What is it currently at?
We had estimated this year, because we haven't gotten this year, we're always a year behind, so we estimated this year at 70%.
Oh, I see.
So that's why we're estimating next year at 70%. We won't really find out the real number for this year until like April, May. So it's always a year behind. We try to call, what they do is, actually Dominic gets this number because all of the business managers put it out. What are you putting in for your excess cost grant? And they try to get the information from the state the best they can, and that was the estimate.
So in prior years, prior to 70%, what were we being reimbursed at?
That's in our initial budget presentation. Let me-
73, was it?
Yeah, I think 73.
Actually,
That's the
the-
3% you're talking about, Ms. Rogers?
no, no, that
That's
was,
different.
we were looking at the projections. In previous years, it ranged. We actually, in 2009-10, it was 83%.
Yeah.
Then it went to 78%, then it was 75%. It went back up in 2012-13 to 81.3%. Then it went down to 70%, 80%, 80%, 70, and in 17-18 it was 73. It fluctuates because it's based on what districts actually apply for. So some districts don't do their due diligence, and so then there's extra, I don't want to say extra, but there is extra money. So then the state is able to dole out the extra funds to the districts that who have done their due diligence.
So we have to get everything in by what date, what?
We had to do our first excess cost in November.
Yeah.
So we did that. And then we have to do another one, I want to say March-ish. And then we'll get our final number usually May. And that's when we could adjust, that's when oftentimes, and we do this on an annual basis, that's when, if we have money that we're able to get more of, that's when we adjust our budget, but we can't do that prematurely.
So my other question is, on top of that reimbursement from the state, some students are eligible for like Medicaid reimbursements?
Correct.
And so that's on top of what we would be getting from the state,
Correct.
correct?
And the Medicaid account, we use that gets, we can only use, you're not allowed to use Medicaid 2 years in a row in the same way. So if we use it 1 year for a certain services, the next year we have to change. But we reinvest in our budget. Our budget would be higher if we didn't use our Medicaid funds. So we use it sometimes for, we use it for outside consultants in different areas that are directly related to those special needs. So it might be OT, might be PT, those types of services.
So if we use it for 1 year to pay for everybody's OT services,
Then the
the
next
next year we can't use it for OT at all?
but you could use the same amount, you just move it to a different, it's unfortunately, it's a strange requirement. The money doesn't change. So the constant is that if, say we use $300,000, we can use $300,000 every year. It's just that you're not, according to, if you're the strictest letter of the law, you're not supposed to use it multiple years in a row in the same account, for the same account. So you could always use $300,000.
But we have to use it for OT 1 year, PT the next
Potentially,
year?
yeah. You can cover part of it, the secretarial costs for the person who does Medicaid, that could be consistent. So like we're able to offset that expenditure on a regular basis. But otherwise, you're not supposed to use it multiple years in a row for the same service. It's just one of those nuances.
Mhm.
All right, we're on page 10.
All righty. Close myself.
Kind of a short page, not a lot of change there. Moving on to page 11. Okay, Mrs. Purcell.
All right.
So your question was answered in the packet.
Yeah, but I have follow-up questions.
All right.
All right, first off, I just want to say, instructional supplies, I realize that you've gone down 64,000. It's not a lot of money, but in the last 10 years, I've seen this trend go down and down and down.
Yeah, because the population is
I
decreasing.
understand. But what I'm saying is teachers still spend a lot of their own money to get things that they would like to be able to get. And instead of always bringing that down, it would be nice to be able to get the allocation up a little bit for the teachers, number one. Number two, you answered because one of the questions I had was the allocation equal across? And I'm also asking that when you look at the allocation, I know you look at per student, but I want you to also think about per class. So for instance, let me give you an example. If Pat has 200 students in his school and I have 100 students in my school, he gets double the money. But if we're still teaching 24 kids, I still need 24 pieces of equipment.
Yeah, but you still get, if you're teaching 24 students, you still get the 24. It's per pupil. So the fact
Yeah,
is,
no, you're not understanding.
well, because
Okay,
I
so
don't
for
get
ins-
your math,
Okay.
to be honest.
So 'cause you're thinking classroom teacher, I'm thinking specialist, okay?
Yeah.
So if there's 200 kids in his thing and I get a price per student, he gets double the money, right?
So you're talking about specialists, because you had to
Right.
clarify that.
So what yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
as a specialist, I still have to teach 24 kids in a classroom. I still need 24, whatever it is that I need. Yet I get half the money as somebody who has a bigger school, but we're still teaching the same number of kids in a classroom. Is that what,
Yeah, so
am I
just
making
looking at
sense?
the specialists, and we do a bump up at the middle school, which we've instituted about 8 years ago, or 7 years
Right.
ago, where we do a rotating bump up for the areas in the Unified Arts or Encore classes. Just to clarify before we go back to this part of the question, we did increase the allocations 2.5% this year. So, all
Overall, you
allocation-
did?
Yeah,
Okay.
we did. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. And my other question is, when we looked at how it's allocated, you have elementary and middle, which you gave me for specials, but you didn't include high school, and my question is why?
So for the district allocations for special area and Encore, it does go K-8. High school takes care of special area or, departments through their own building-based budget. Their allocation per pupil is higher, and they allocate that out to all areas throughout the high school. The practice has been for, I want to say, 5 years plus, probably a
Oh,
little
no,
bit
it's-
more.
Oh, it's a lot longer
It
than that.
predates me, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot longer.
No,
than
I
that.
mean the special area allocations in the budget. The
Oh.
K-8, that started
Oh, no,
a
that-
year or so
that was
after
new
I came.
I
because
can
we-
tell you when, because I was part
Yeah.
of getting that started.
Right.
But my point is, you now have curriculum specialists in certain areas,
Mhm.
okay? That they should be, they're doing curriculum K-12, they should be doing allocations K-12. Maybe they can't do everything, but certainly, and I can tell you, just talking to people, there might be something in this building that could help this building if one person was looking at everything and the allocations were such.
Well, for high school, the curriculum coordinators do use a lens K-12, and they do budget for certain items, so it's not completely taken care of by the building. When you look at things that are integral to the curriculum, whether it's equipment or otherwise, curriculum will budget for that. And oftentimes, they will take the lead in asking their department, what are your needs? So for example, it might be for food and consumer science, it might be small wares, or it might be for tech ed drills and hammers, and I was just ordering drill bits the other day. The building money goes for more consumable things by nature, and the curriculum money that is budgeted goes for more, big ticket items, so that there is equity across the two high schools, or the two middle schools.
Like the heart monitors that were bought by
Correct.
central office, not
Yep.
by the buildings.
Right.
So those would be
So
the types of things.
That's kind of how it has worked. As the coordinators expanded to each area, they will look at making sure there's equity in terms of equipment and other things in order for the teachers to implement their curriculum.
Okay, I still disagree that, I think that if you have someone in charge of that area, they should look at it. And here, I can only give you an example from my discipline because that's what I say.
Sure.
Elementary would get about $300-400, okay? High school could get between $1,500 and $2,500. Middle school somewhere in between. And actually, the two middle schools, I think, are not identical right now, or weren't. But my point being is that if you had someone who's coordinating and looking at it all around, you can kind of adjust yearly depending on what the needs, okay? Example, elementary PE, we use Nerf stuff. It lasts a year, maybe 2 years, and that's it, and you have to replace it. A budget would take almost my entire budget to just replace that part, where a high school basketball, let's say, could last maybe longer. So what I'm just saying is if you have someone in charge of K-12, different things, they can kind of balance it out. This year, we got to give a little more to the high school. Next year, maybe a little more to the middle school, a little more to elementary, to kind of balance out that equipment. And so I would just like to say it'd be nice to have the allocations done by the people in charge of the curriculum in that particular discipline.
Well, it's something to consider. I know that our building principals, there are schools that the building principals do allocate more funds to other areas based on their conversations with the teachers, so we could bring that back to the principals also. Because I know that does happen at some of the elementary schools where if there is a need in physical education or in music or in art, the principal will take some of the overall allocations and actually bump it up on their own. That might not be happening at all schools because it's a building-based decision, but that's something that we could definitely share with the principals as a concern and look at it a little differently. But we don't want to, and I know you're not suggesting this, we don't want to remove the principals totally from this, but we just want to be more collaborative and maybe have a more, because you might have more bang for your buck, to be honest, in what you're saying too.
Right, and the thing too is the allocation's always higher at high school than it is like at elementary.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So the thing is, but sometimes the need, some years may be more needed at other areas, that's all I'm saying.
Well, and that's where we came up with the bump up at the middle school, 5 or 6 years ago, was because there was a big issue, especially in the area of family consumer science at the middle schools. We had equipment that was just dying, and it was in nobody's budget.
Right.
And so that was our major issue there, was the fact that we had to do something drastic, and that's why we did the bump up year, which is on a rotating basis, to try to help in that area.
But the other thing, and I don't want to just stick to PE, because I'm really
Yeah,
not
no.
just there. That's just my experience.
What's your frame of reference?
My frame of reference. But I can tell you that I'm pretty sure that most elementary teachers probably spend more out-of-pocket expense than probably the other levels. And I don't think that's fair, and I just think something we have to think about when we allocate money, to help them out.
And I think you bring up just one last part of this. I think the other part of it, and maybe the recommendation that you're making is one to look at the whole system, because I think probably the allocations, and again, I wasn't here when that was established, these were established. I think the understanding was that, and in many cases it's true, that high school textbooks cost a lot more money. However, we've taken over the textbooks costs. So that's a change in practice. And then there's some consumables that are more. So your science labs, of course, those do not come all the central office necessarily. There are some things that do happen through the building. A lot does. So I think you bring up a really good point to look at that as we move forward for next year. I shouldn't say for the following year, because, obviously we have to honor where we are with this. But we can definitely look forward, because I think that, different things have changed.
Mrs. McKay?
But also, if I recall correctly, I don't know the magic years, 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever, there were principals that weren't utilizing their allocations fully, and they were
Correct.
leaving them on the table.
Correct.
And that, that may be
Correct.
true, but the fact of the matter is, that was an opportunity for the board to look at, if you're going to leave money on the table, then we're going to cut you. So you have to understand that the history behind that wasn't just random cutting that allocation category, but when principals, and again, those principals may not even be in our system anymore, but at the time when we were looking at ways to reduce our budget, that was a no-brainer, frankly. If you're going to leave money on the table, then that's your fault, frankly.
And that's when we did multiple years of analysis
Right.
with certain lines. We didn't just cut it the first year.
Right.
We
And-
went to them and said,
and it
okay,
was a
3 years in a
consistent-
row.
Yeah, it was a consistent pattern, that there were some principals that were, and I'm not looking to pigeonhole elementary, middle, or high school, but the fact of the matter is, they weren't using the money. So that was an obvious place to cut, and they weren't advocating
Yeah.
for themselves, frankly.
And again,
And that's scary.
Well, Patty, but
I have
that's
to just say.
that's the truth of the matter.
It's happened, and
It's
it's
too
not
bad.
just Wallingford. It's
Yeah.
not just Wallingford.
Yes.
It happens. And I think that the thing is that we want to, there's good news and bad news with that. We want people to spend the money appropriately for what it was
Right.
budgeted for.
Agreed.
And if they budgeted or they inherited a line item that was never going to be expended, we don't want them just to waste it
Right.
either.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
The
agree
other
with that.
challenge with all of this conversation when it comes to allocations is, again, it's the tough decision. Allocations in a classroom of 32 or allocations in a classroom of 23. So do you want the extra teachers or do you want the allocations? Because it does, if you add it, because when we look at this and if you continue
Small
to
number.
add, there's that other part that you have to look at. What is the trade-off?
No, I know, but the allocation's such a small number compared to teachers.
I understand, it's still $1 million.
Right.
Yeah, no, I realize, I'm just
That's a
saying.
1%
I'm
right
just saying
there.
it's something to think, I want you to just think about how things are
I think it's
allocated.
how to allocate the allocations.
Yeah.
I think that's what I think it's a really good point, because I think we do have to look at the high school a little closer, and then the coordinators, I do agree with you, 100%.
Okay, Mrs. Raccio, and then after Mrs. Raccio, Mr. Votto.
And I do think that on the elementary level, I know in the elementaries that I've been involved with, the PTOs that are robust also allow teachers to put in up to $100 worth of receipts and get direct reimbursement from the PTO. So I don't know, I'm sure there's different experiences from different principals. I know Mrs. Latour, you didn't have that benefit. But there is that option for many of the elementaries that doesn't exist for the high school and middle school.
Yeah, that's true, too.
We have to go to the parents to ask for money.
Mr. Votto?
What part do the teachers actually play in that allocation? Are they asked, there was a time when I was in a classroom, they say, your team, how much money would you need for, and give us the things you need. Does every principal do it differently?
I
You
know
know-
at the high school it's done through the department heads. I know at the middle school it's done through the subject area coordinators and team leaders. At the elementary schools, I think it's done in a variety of ways. I don't want to put one of our elementary principals on the spot, but I will. Ms. Agnella, would you like to go to the microphone and potentially share on how at Parker Farms?
She's going to say she does it all.
I don't think so. I'm pretty confident that that's not the case.
No, I will be honest that it is a team effort, and you know, from my experience, we have certain amount of money that is divided amongst. So when we get the budget that is given to our school, and then we say, like, for our school, how much we're going at Parker Farms to put aside for field trips, how much we're going to divide for the 14 teachers and put aside for them to have their $300 that they'll use. So we just kind of look at the big picture and try to decide based upon how, you know, and that's really me kind of deciding, looking on what's happened in the past practice, whether teachers have used their money or not, and really going from there forward to say, this has been really what they've needed. And sometimes they'll talk to us about more things, but then we can look at other areas. So we do just try to even it out, and then I'll just make the decision of what goes where. So
And I know that the elementary principals get together and also discuss amongst
Right.
themselves as to how they're going to allocate, so there isn't a significant
Right.
discrepancy, or if there's a way to trade things off.
Right.
So sometimes they will trade off. If I have too many resources in this area, I could trade them off to this, and then you could buy this. There is that collaboration and at all levels, but I know many times our elementary principal meetings, they either meet before because they're discussing matters together, or they stay very late after
Yes.
and discuss matters together. So I was confident that it is a collaborative process. I'm not saying that it's done exactly the same at each school,
Right.
but I do know that there's that feedback.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sagnola.
My
Mr.
other
Votto,
question,
yeah.
going to the textbooks, you know, that low number always bothers people, I guess. But you had mentioned earlier that you wait for unencumbered funds to decide. Now, is there a list? Is there a?
Yes, we have the list. We can give it to you.
No, I don't want it now. Just-
Again,
So you do have a list of books that you
Oh.
might need, and
absolutely.
you're just waiting for the
Miss
unencumbered
Latour,
funds.
Miss Latour has a sheet
have a
for
couple
you.
of different lists
I'm so glad
going.
I get Mrs. Latour to answer.
So through the curriculum review cycle, we have identified the areas that we are writing, you know, and that we'll need to purchase textbooks for. So we'll be coming to the board in the spring with our textbook adoption requests, and then be ready to purchase them when we are given the green light.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Purcell.
Johan?
All right, so are these textbooks not part of the, so the instructional supplies no longer have textbooks in them? Because you were saying the high schools were different than the middle and because of textbooks?
Well,
But now we
there's-
have another line for it?
There's a variety of things with the high school. There's replacement parts of the allocation, so they
Okay.
use money to replace textbooks, which are generally more expensive at the high school level.
So
So that's one of the things.
So that's in instructional supplies and not in textbooks?
Correct.
Okay.
It depends on where the principal puts and how much, but in most often it's in the instructional supply account. But again, curriculum, and this is one of the areas that's why it's a good point you bring up. It's one of the areas that we've begun to transfer to have more accountability by putting it in the curriculum department with the curriculum coordinator support and Carrie's support.
Okay, thank you.
It speaks to exactly what you were asking for.
Ms. Raccio?
Just a housekeeping issue.
Sure.
I go up to question 76. Is that your last question?
For
All of our questions and answers?
yeah, that's not the last question. Those are the ones we got to.
Oh, gotcha.
I said we had 83
Because you
or
were
80.
referencing 79, and I'm like, I don't
Yeah,
have
it's
a
79. It's 79
On your list.
on
You
my
don't have
list,
those.
but
Gotcha.
you don't have 79 yet.
All right.
79 will be
Sorry.
to you.
Mrs. Corso?
So I just want to get a better idea of, for example, if each teacher has, in an elementary school, has a $300 allocation, and we're talking about instructional supplies, are they spending this money on, like, manipulatives for math? Or what is this 300, what do we typically, because it's not office supplies, right? It's not like
is.
crayons and markers and things like that.
Yes, it is.
Or it
Yes, it
is.
It could be crayons and markers, it could be notebooks, it could be journals. When it comes to math manipulatives, when it comes to level text, those are generally purchased out of the curriculum office through the math budget, through the ELA budget. It really is the consumable type of things that a teacher may need throughout the year. Chart pads, dry erase markers,
Sentence strips.
individual whiteboards for the class, that
So-
type of thing.
So are they all purchased, are teachers like going on Amazon and purchasing, or they're purchased out of the
We use, there's a variety of
Office
places.
Depot or whatever?
Well, there's a variety of places that most of them use school specialty. So school specialty, they'll go into the cart, there's cross-referencing so they can look at different prices, the principals assist with that. So there are a variety of vendors that they could look at. So we do try to look at the lowest prices, but sometimes the lowest price on a paperclip, and it falls apart really quickly for the little ones, isn't
Yeah.
worth it. So that we also let the teachers make those decisions. But the key thing, and I think this is really important, I'm glad you brought this up, is that the allocations are for those items. The instructional, this does not mean $300 for a teacher to be able to teach vocabulary, or to teach reading, or to teach math, or to teach science. All of those items come elsewhere. So like the science, all the science kits, that all comes through curriculum budget. That is not part of that $300. So there aren't students who are having an inequitable opportunity in terms of delivery of content instruction and content materials, because those are all coming out of the curriculum budget. It might be that there might not be as many Post-it notes or those types of things. That's up to the teacher and his or her individual style in the classroom.
So there's no longer like a supply closet where you put in a little slip that says, I want 10 packages
That's at
of-"
the middle school and high school level.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the elementary.
But elementary, they have to purchase their own paper clips out of this allocation.
For the most part, yes, yeah.
What if
And
they run out of them?
then I'm sure then they do go to the principal and they probably say I need more paper clips, or they go to a neighbor and say I'll trade you a box of paper clips, or I'll trade you a glue stick for paper clips.
Or they ask.
Yeah, or they ask parents, but I mean I have to say I don't, and I know this is not going to be popular, but I don't think $300 is a too low amount. I think it's right in the ballpark. I understand for different content areas, like Patty's talking about a curricular area where they do have to purchase
Right.
different materials.
Right.
That is a very different thing than a classroom teacher of 20, most often on average 20 at the 3-5 level, 21, 22 students. Very different than a physical education teacher who is servicing all 342 students. That's very different.
Okay, Mrs. Purcell?
In addition, so whatever the $300 or $400 I would get, it included all the equipment that I had to buy, plus I had to buy my own pencils and pens and
Correct.
staples.
No, that's
and
what I was
tape
just saying.
And scissors. So all that plus equipment. So keep that in mind.
No, that's what I was
Yeah.
supporting you.
I'm
in
just
that.
saying, I bought it all myself out of my own personal.
I do just want to mention in the last few years, Patty,
Yeah.
when it comes to bigger equipment, like hockey nets or, that type of thing, that is where the curriculum office have stepped in to say, what kinds of equipment do you
Good.
need that we would budget for, so that it wouldn't be, your allocation, your entire allocation goes to a mat or to a hoop or to a net. That you still have the opportunity to get whatever else you may need, whether it's pencils, whether it's cones, whether it's, more basketballs or otherwise. We are trying, and we're seeking input from each department, what are the things that you need in order to teach your units of study, so that we can budget for the big ticket items.
Our classroom teacher, their library that's in their classroom, does that come out of the allocation?
No.
No.
So that comes from central,
Curriculum.
for curriculum
Yeah,
too?
curriculum.
Well,
For
the
their own
instructional text will,
Yeah,
in certain cases. Curriculum spends a lot of money on level text.
right.
Building principals spend a lot of money on level text for like book rooms. When you're talking about like a classroom library,
Yeah.
teachers will use scholastic points, when they do the take-home book orders and get a lot of free books. When the elementary schools have their book fairs, at the end of the book fair, there's always like scholastic dollars that can be spent. Those are built lovingly over time through a variety of different methods. But the curriculum office in the last few years has made a dedicated effort to ensure that there are appropriate level texts for small group instruction and otherwise that range many, many levels to ensure that the teachers have the text they need to instruct their students both in whole group and in small group.
Okay, thanks. I just, where in the budget does it show your curriculum expense? You know, you're saying you have these lines for
Yeah.
all these things. Is there somewhere in the budget? You can tell me later. I don't need
yeah.
to know this second.
Well, I think what we might want to do, and we could talk to, Carrie and I could speak with Dominic, and obviously in the area, again, in your wheelhouse, most specifically is physical education. We could talk and look at if we take the elementary schools and really tell you what the true allocation is, because I think you're focused on what you previously had, which was the $300 allocation. That's not really a true allocation of what's going to physical education teachers right now because of all these ancillary purchases.
Okay,
So-
again, I'm not just
Well, no,
PE.
but it's just easier to, I don't want to be honest,
I don't
I'd
want to
rather
spend a lot of
focus-
time on this because I've already spent a lot of time, and you can
No.
get back to me later, that's
Yeah,
fine.
no, I'm not gonna do it right now, but I'm just saying I don't wanna focus on all specialty areas. I would just focus on one, and get you that data to show that it's really not a true, the $300 is not really only amount that we're spending on that curriculum area. Because there are other additional expenditures, and Carrie's been, the curriculum department over the past few years has really taken on more of that responsibility, because we want to make sure that the curriculum is also being implemented with fidelity. So we need to make sure we do that by centralizing some of the purchase of those items. So, but we could take a look closer. We could pick a different area. We could pick art.
Mr. Ross?
Do we have an idea of the average what a teacher spends out of pocket? Because I've heard of figures sometimes of $1,000 a year.
I don't
We
know.
don't track that.
I don't think there's a place that would track that,
That's
because,
right off.
I mean, I don't know how we would make certain that I don't know how to collect that data. Besides, we could ask, but I don't know, again, if that's data that is going to be, I don't know how you plan to use that data. That would be the question.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Raccio?
When we do look at the curriculum, could you look at curriculum for the Audible books, either the playaways or the Bookshare type of books, to make sure there's access in all of the elementary schools?
Yes, we have, for example, we have an Overdrive account through the district. We have another service, which of course the name is escaping me right now, that is a free service for Audible books. No, I just said Overdrive. I can't remember.
Bookshare.
It begins with an E. No, it's not Bookshare. It's something else. But
Epic.
yes, I will get that information.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions on page 11? We'll move on to page 12, which is kind of something that we're,
No conversation about heat?
no, I think it is.
The
what-
allocation
it
is
is what it
based
is.
on the build. Just kidding. All right.
Page 13. What does the Student Learning and Collaboration Center, what does that look like? What does that amount entail?
This again goes back to the allocation that was provided to the alternative high school. So they were allowed to they were allowed to set aside funds as they saw fit. And I believe we answered this question in the packet, but I'm not
okay.
sure exactly which number. I believe it was asked by a board member. And
Okay, if you have the answer in there, that's perfectly fine with me.
yeah, I believe it's in here. If it's not, then just let me know. But I believe that was asked of a board member as to that question about that allocation. But again, that goes back to the money is allocated to that particular department, and then they determine what they would utilize the funds for.
Other
But-
questions on page 13? All right, we're on the last page, page 14. Who oversees the 3D printing? Do we know who does that?
This was actually a request from Lyman Hall High School. So this was, again, it's part of their allocations. So they decided, because we had developed the maker spaces at the two high schools and the media centers, they decided that they wanted to allocate more funds in this area in terms of just making sure that the media center, who the library media specialist would oversee that particular area of the space.
Okay, library media specialist. Any other questions on page 14? Okay, we're through sustained. That's good. Now, what's the group's pleasure? Do you want to forge ahead towards some of the strategic, or?
It's up to the board if we want to look at the prioritization, or do we want to
You want to look at
press
the prioritization
pause
first?
and we can come back next week? I mean, it's up to all of you.
I know we had discussed that after a certain amount of time, we kind of get bogged down, and we want to be looking at this in a fresh way to make sure that we're asking all the questions we want to and addressing all the concerns that we have. So I don't know if
I
Mrs.
also want to
Corso.
have a chance to look through the answers to all the questions
That's a good point.
before we go forward.
I feel like I'm asking the same things twice sometimes.
Right.
That's fine.
But I would like to go through a little bit more tonight, that's my own opinion. I mean, it's early.
That's perfectly fine. I think we had decided 2 to 2.5 hours, the most.
We found in the past that we lose focus. I'll speak
Right.
for myself, that it's a lot to try to, and we do have 4 meetings scheduled, so, again, this is
Right.
not a sprint. And that's just to get us to the first
Right.
checkpoint, or hurdle.
So what's the pleasure of the group? Did you want to look over the strategic plan prioritization?
Sure. Let's do that. That's something that I'll carry us to about another half hour.
Okay.
Where is, I know we're replacing it. Sal, where is it in, I know we're.
It's the
Section
last
3.
page.
Thank you.
It's right here.
Of section 3?
Yep.
Got it. And we're ripping that one out.
I don't know, I like
Because all the oil tanks are taken out, right?
Mm.
All right, so we're taking this one out. Okay, mother.
Eh,
So, in looking at the strategic plan prioritization,
So it's the one that has, it's the one at the bottom that you have 3.41?
right, so it looks like this sheet, we're all on the same page.
Yep.
Correct.
So usually at this point, this is what's been suggested, but sometimes board members have a little different idea about what they would like to see come up on the list, or maybe drop down on the list as far as priority. Mrs. McKay?
So just quickly looking at this, items 2 through 8, 9, 2 through 9, well, probably even 10 for that matter, are one-time expenditures that could come from unencumbered or a 1% account, potentially. I mean, is that a reasonable comment to make?
Yes. So what you'd see on the screen here, I put it up here in the colors so you could see it for you. So the thing is that anything in green are potential, when we look at this, we have, so 2 is the, and I'm just going to go through these if you don't mind, Ms. McKay, because
Yeah,
just for
that's
TV
great.
land.
No, I
So
appreciate
number
that.
2 is the servers. Number 3 is the student computer replacement cycle. Number 4 is replacement of Chromebooks for students. Number 7 is computing devices. Number 9 are projection systems. So again, those are one-time expenditures. Then you go to 15, which is voicemail. That would be an upgrade, and then there's, I'm assuming there's a service expense to that, Ms. Vayu, right? Yes. There would be a service expense to that, but initially it's an upgrade there. Classroom projection systems, again, one-time expenditure in number 16. 17, teacher laptops is a one-time expenditure. And then we jump down to 20, cable access TV equipment, one-time expenditure. 21, IT vehicle, one-time expenditure. 22, computers in libraries, labs, and offices. And we do have a few computer labs because at the elementary schools, K2 and 3-5, remember they take IT classes in the computer labs. We don't have as many functional computer labs at the middle schools. We do have one at Moran because we teach our coding class there. So those are less shifts there. And then digital signage would be a one-time purchase, and replacement of time clocks would be a one-time purchase. So everything in green, and I just wanted to read all of those because it's difficult to read probably on TV. Those would be one-time expenditures that potentially could be removed to be used or funded partially or in whole by depending the 1% account.
Right, or unencumbered.
Or unencumbered funds.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And some are decent-sized ticket items, but others are not particularly large.
Correct.
And I mean, your prioritization is your prioritization. I'm not here to question it per se, but I think for newer board members to just keep that in the back of your mind. Those are quickly items. Those are quick items that we typically take care of through unencumbered or 1% accounts. That's just a traditional thing that we do that I think is important to just bring sight of. I know musical instruments are always, it always seems to get dropped off, and it's such a.
Did we do it last year?
We did, and I mean.
We
for
did $10,000
Yeah,
last year,
right,
so
and I
we've been
think that's
chipping
a-
away at it every year.
Right, and I think that's a nice steady amount. I feel very strongly, item 12, communication specialist is a very critical item for a district this size. And I think we are woefully short on this, and unfortunately, what it ends up happening is, there's no doubt, the superintendent is the go-to person in any district, end of story. I mean, that person is responsible for the district and needs to be accountable for the district. I'm not disputing that fact, but I think in today's world, how we communicate, the degree of frequency we communicate, the expectations of how we communicate are just so heightened. I think that it ends up falling on our central office, whether it's the superintendent or the two assistant superintendents, to deal with that. And whether it's an FOI request or, just dealing with the media, I think that that's a very important role, and I don't think it needs to be full-time. I think it's very modest of a estimate of $31,200. I think it's a very important position and woefully short for this for a district our size, not to have a go-to person to handle some of the basic minutia of communication. But I say minutia, but it isn't minutia. It needs to be done accurately, appropriately, and timely. And I think that when the expectations, again, of how we communicate as a society has changed so dramatically in the last few years, I think this is a really important area for us as a district to consider. Thank you.
Ms. Purcell?
Are the facility things here in yellow, are those one-time things too?
Yes, so we have I'll read them again.
Oh, I'm sorry, did you include those? I didn't.
No, I'll read those. I didn't mean again that I read them already. Just,
Okay.
I don't want to slight the people at home that I know are riveted by them. But the facilities, we do have 90-foot mats that would be used for Cook Hill, door hardware at Moses Y, door hardware at Cook Hill, and repair sidewalks at Moses Y, maintenance vehicle, and then kitchen floor tile at Highland, and then tile in the kitchen floor, a second portion of that. So the thing is that when you take these, going back to Roxanne's point, the ones in green, there's $427,000 of non-reoccurring expenditures. And then if you add to that another 25, 35, let's see, that's 84, 92.5 in the yellow ones. So now if you take out the 92.5 and then you take the musical instruments, which is a non-reoccurring expenditure, you have another 102.5. So you have 102.5 plus, so it's 529.5 that is non-reoccurring. So again, if we were looking at that as a board, as Roxanne kind of contextualized, oftentimes we do present these to you and then we look at, okay, if we took those out as potential unencumbered fund balance items that we purchase throughout the year as we see funds available. Now you have that's over 0.5%. It's 0.53% off. So now your 3.41 drops down to a 2.7 something to that point. So now you're only adding in your sustained services to your sustained services about a 0.3, a 0.4. Rather than a 1%.
I just have one question
Sure.
on the facilities, and maybe that can be answered. It seems like there's a duplication in the budget book. On page 1, it says Highland replaced tile, floor, and kitchen, and that's $8,500.
Yes, and that's what I was going to check into, because
And
then there's
the
Highland 4,000 for tile.
4,000.
Yeah.
So when I went through the budget book, I noticed that disparity, and I'm not quite sure if it's in different parts of the kitchen or it was a duplicate, perhaps.
Mark, do you?
I apologize for that. The one price was an original request for VCT floor tile. Our intent is to install rubberized floor tile, which is no wax, no strip, so we eliminate all those chemicals and toxins from the atmosphere.
Okay, so it's, okay.
So they're both still good? Both those numbers are still good?
I would say that one has to come out of the strategic plan budget, the one on page 1 of the facilities, because that's the one that's 8,500.
So what I'm doing, as you're probably wondering, but again, it brings it down. If we took out those items I just alluded to, it brings it down to a 2.89, which was close
For
to
a
what it.
strategic plan.
For a
2.89.
strategic plan, with the items that remain, which would be the CNA, or the medical careers teacher, the communication specialist, and again, the 2 deans of students. So that brings it up.
Coaches.
And the coaches, I'm sorry, I missed that
So
one.
do that again, the CNA.
So it's the CNA,
Yep,
number 1,
yep,
number 12,
yep,
number 13,
yep,
number 14.
okay.
And that would bring it to a 2.89. And again, our sustained was a 2.4. So it brings it up of 0.49, so less than 0.5%.
So the total would be,
The total would be a
Five.
2.89% increase. So
ins-
instead of a 2.4.
2.4.
Right.
The
that would be
2.4 was the sustained services.
Right.
And
So
then
there we're
with the
adding,
addition
we're
of these
adding, with the
4.
additions of these items, item
Right.
number 1,
Oh, got it,
item
yeah,
number
got it.
12, 13, and
It brings it to
14,
2.89.
it brings it to a 2.89.
which takes out those one-time expenditures.
That takes out the one-time expenditures, and that amount, as I said, comes out to about 500 and
29,000.
or so, yep.
That's about right.
Now, why wouldn't we consider the facilities request for a vehicle? Isn't that a one-time?
Yeah, I
thing?
took that out, so that would be
Okay.
another item. So I took out the facilities vehicle of with the tailgate and also,
18.
and then 18, 19, and then the duplicate of 25. So I took all those out, added those up, and so it'd be about, as I said, it's 529.5 for those items.
No, okay.
So you added the yellow and the greens together.
I added the yellow, the greens, and the 1 blue of the musical instruments.
Oh, the one blue.
And it comes out to probably some color of brown.
Mrs. Levack, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Votto, please go ahead.
The door hardware for those 2 schools,
Yep.
that was, I guess we didn't do that in those schools like we did with the other, didn't we have that safety,
Mm-hmm.
what was that
Mark.
money we spent?
This keeps changing, and right now, there's no guidelines or codes that govern any of this, so we've been very conservative in our approach, so we update things as needed. We never addressed all doors and all locks district-wide.
But didn't we do a bunch of them last year? or-
Yes.
Yes,
we
it's
did.
going to be a rolling, ongoing process.
Yeah.
All right, so these doors will actually now all have, if we do this, every classroom will have the one key. Is that how it works?
Not every school is different, but that's the intent.
That's the intent.
Yeah.
What color are those?
The hardware was yellow.
Those are yellow?
Number 6 and number 8.
Yeah. So that's part of the,
That would be part of, if we were to use unencumbered funds,
Right.
that 529.
yeah, I'm really concerned about that. I want those to be a real priority.
Mm-hmm.
I think the door hardware, everybody being on the same plane.
It's such a small amount.
Yeah, it is.
It is, yeah, 11,000 for the two.
Okay, Mrs. Corso?
I apologize because I missed the explanation for the communication specialist in the beginning. But it looks like it was a part-time position that you were looking for. And you had also talked about a grant writer being a part-time position. What are the qualifications of those two positions, and could they be combined into one position?
I
Or
think
is
that.
it two different
Then you gotta
skill
worry
sets?
about
Yeah, I think it's two different skill sets, because
Okay.
that was one of the things we talked about. I think with the grant writer, one thing that I mentioned at the beginning was that was for next year, but it was a question that
Right.
came up. But what we're thinking of doing is drafting an RFP for someone to be hired that would get paid off of the grants that they successfully write. So kind of do it as a performance contract that would not take money from the budget, but actually come from the funded grant. So they would get paid when they get grants based on that grant. So we're thinking of investigating and getting some information on other districts that have approached it that way. I don't know many who have, but I think corporate companies do, as well as foundations. So I'm going to reach out to like Napier and other foundations and see if they have any recommendations. We also have, there's a woman, Paula Love, who is considered like the grant guru for the country. And we have a good relationship with her. Actually, she sends to us some of our grants that we end up writing. And I'm going to reach out to her and see if she has any recommendations as to how we can write an RFP. And would we be successful in finding somebody?
That was my first question. My second question, last year, I remember in this strategic plan list was the resurfacing the auxiliary gym at Moran, the back gym at Moran, but I don't see that this year. Was that addressed at all?
It is stressed, yeah.
We're investigating, and we intend to go through with a new type of floor in those areas. Currently, basically, it's just paint on concrete, if that's the floor you're talking about.
That aux gym in the back, yeah, it's
It's
pretty
rubber.
bad.
It's rubberized
the
floor.
industry-
Rubber.
The industry no longer supports that floor, so we're looking at different types. And
Is that something that could stay until the facility study
it
is
certainly could,
vetted?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
One of the things, and we talked a little bit about, is that the items that we've decided to move forward on the strategic plan were things that only had to be done, or that are going to the mayor for capital bonding on those 4 buildings that had to be done within the next 5 years.
Okay.
Because we're trying to give us that
Is
window.
there a Band-Aid to put on that floor in the back at all, like, or just leave it as is until, 'cause
I'm-
it's
I'm
pretty
not-
bad.
I'm not aware of any way of, doing a temporary patch
I
job
think
on
you
it.
could,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, we'll allow a quick comment from Mrs. Purcell on the same issue.
The floor, I agree with you, the floor is in bad shape, but I don't think it's more the lines and in the look of it. I think it's still usable. Like you said, if we are gonna redo the buildings, it could possibly wait.
It was the application at the time to put on the floor. That was,
Oh, yeah.
that was what was being done in buildings. Now
Rubberized.
it's changed.
Okay, Mrs. Veracchio, followed by Mr. Ross.
Okay, so I'm looking at my question for your answer 48. And Roxanne, I totally agree with you with the communication specialist. That's long overdue, in my opinion. I would, however, like to see it go back to the funding status that it was for last year as a full-time position and utilize those extra hours. We have 100 new special ed families from last year. We have more from this year. And I think that there's an opportunity there to communicate better with the families. I'm not talking about a welcome kit or a checklist or procedural guidelines, but establish partnerships on the onset as families join with special education, as opposed to having conflict and trying to build relationships if there's a problem. I understand, and I agree with the comment, Dr. Menzo, your reply in here about, is it really a sense of not being engaged versus not receiving what you want? And I get that piece of it, but unless parents feel like they had a voice and they're engaged or they're on the same team, no matter what you give them, it's not gonna be, the trust isn't gonna be there. So I would,
You could finish.
No. So I guess I would just like to look at that from an opportunity to build relationships, and it's not just going into the PPT and sitting in the meeting for 2 hours and what the communication is there. And we've had many talks about process and what happens outside of the process. And it goes to the communication tree of who to call, when to call. I still don't know who to contact when I have some issues. So I think that there's an opportunity there to help build strong relationships in the beginning. And it wouldn't, I think your comments in the opening of the meeting were excellent, because I don't think that this position, if it was a full-time position, would just be earmarked, the other half per se, would be earmarked towards special education. But I think that there's an opportunity there to kind of combine what we had with family resource centers that didn't fly, because we just couldn't get families to come out at 6 or 7 o'clock at night for an hour or two. But
Or during the day, when we offered them during the day, too.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's hard too. But I think there's an opportunity there to build some more communication, family engagement, and connection, so that we have the trust when issues do come up.
I think the only concern I would have, and again, I think it might be a different type of person also, when you start talking about specialized programs like special ed. So I think that would be because the ideal person for this position, and I do have job descriptions that I got from other districts who have these, they're really communications majors. They're not education people. They're people who are going and get their communications degree. They probably have some understanding, some of the coursework that would deal with the whole process of dealing with situations of crisis, dealing with situations of challenges, to have them potentially go, and I think there's a need that you've identified. I don't know if it's the right fit for this particular individual.
And I'm not thinking about specific content knowledge as it relates to special ed, but almost that professional facilitation skill that parents don't necessarily have. And I wouldn't expect gen ed teachers or special ed teachers to know how to professionally facilitate a meeting and focus just on the facilitation, because they're there to focus on the child.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't think this is a person I would, and I don't know if this is what you're suggesting, so I don't, you could help me out here, that they would be actually part of these meetings with parents. I could see them running maybe workshops for parents on how to do things. And staff, but I don't want them, I don't think you're recommending they would be at a PPT or a 504.
Almost a train the trainer.
I could see some of that, but again.
But with parents too.
Correct, but I couldn't see them, and I'm just clarifying, I don't think you're suggesting that they would actually be at the meeting.
No, I think that they would.
'Cause that could be a full-time job.
Case manager, something like that.
There's potential. I think, again, it's a nuanced position that I think combining them, I do think there's needs on both sides of the equation, and it depends on who you get, you know.
And that's what another thing, is that if it is a full-time position, however we build that, the candidate pool may be much different.
It's true.
So if we were
We
thinking
see
to
that with-
expand it, I know, if we were thinking to expand it in the future, we already had it as a full-time position last year.
No, and I think that, again, I think all your points are well taken. I think we were, as a Board of Education, as a central office, we were just trying to be cognizant of the bottom line and try to seed things, as we oftentimes do, is try to seed them and grow. But to your point, we agree, and we had this conversation too. Are we going to get the same quality of candidate for this position if it is only part-time? You might, because it's somebody who might be somebody who has young children who want to work part-time while they're in school. But we have to be cautious with that because some of
But
this
if you
might be
want them to-
outside of school
to
hours.
triage and do the
Correct. And so
emergency stuff and whatnot, that's
it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's not a 5-day-a-week job.
Exactly.
And that's why they wouldn't be part of a union. They'd be a non-union employee, so we would have flex hours and such things like that. So it's a nuanced piece, but I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the support too.
And I
That's for
just
certain.
think that anybody in central office, it would be somebody that you'd want to go to whenever the emergency came up. Not necessarily, like you said, it's not 9 to 5 or 8 to 12 or whatever the part-time, because you're not gonna feel comfortable calling them if it's outside of their standard hours.
True.
And it's, I don't know.
Defeats the purpose.
No, you're absolutely right.
It does.
Mr. Ross, followed by Mr. Votto.
Okay, on facilities, the roof replacement at DAC, is that the roof that we've had that leak in that you can't find?
It's the 1996 roof.
Yes,
correct.
that's that roof.
That's the roof? Okay.
Yes.
And another question, at Sheehan, the softball field, I know this last spring, a lot of the games had to be moved off-site because of water problems.
Yes,
Are
that's
we
correct.
addressing that this year?
We are.
And how, I mean,
That's
are we
not
going
We're-
to put drainage
Most of that
Yeah.
work will be done in-house.
in-house?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
It's,
thank you.
it's a very, the issues there are fairly minor, and they can be corrected relatively simply, easily.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Votto?
Yeah, I totally disagree with the idea that Mrs. Roccio just came up with, because I think they're two different jobs altogether. If I understand what you mean by a communication specialist. I think that, I don't see why we would need a facilitator in that position with special ed. We have teachers, we have case managers that work with children. We have department heads on the elementary and high school level.
Only at the high school level and middle school level. We don't have department head at the elementary.
Mrs. Curtis does what? What's her job?
She's a coordinator at the elementary level. So we have a coordinator at the elementary. Yeah, and we have a middle school, high school coordinator, and then we do have department heads for 6, 12 on either
How many
side. So
people right there?
that's 4.
That's
And then we
4
have a
people.
director as a
If we
5th.
can't be, those 4 people plus the teachers and the director cannot facilitate and relate to parents and help them facilitate any questions or problems or concerns they have, then we have a problem.
Well, I think
Somebody's dropping the ball.
Yeah.
And I think that could be fixed. I don't think this communication specialist should have anything to do with special ed whatsoever,
I think.
unless I'm
Well, no. If I could just voice what I think is being discussed in terms of the special education. I do think it's always an area where sometimes districts are finding, as special education populations increase, that it is oftentimes good to have someone who is not directly connected, not that they're not directly connected with the special ed department, that they're able to be seen as a liaison. And I know it sounds strange because one would say, well, your special ed people who are administrators, who are leaders, should be able to be that liaison. But when you're in a situation where you're new to special ed, you might not know anything about the process because it's new to you, or you might come across a stumbling block. There is bound to be some nervousness, maybe even saying as strong as mistrust that occurs. And that's not unique to Wallingford. That is just part of sometimes those situations. And so what districts are finding, especially as populations grow, and ours has grown, as you know, we are 150 students over 2 years, is a pretty large jump. What districts have found is that they've worked either with hiring somebody or having somebody work as a consultant for the district to help facilitate positive conversation and communication. Almost like when we used to have at PPTs, I know I did, sometimes you'd have an advocate, and the advocate would come on the part of the parent. But there was always that was always a weird moment, and there would be the dueling, tape recorders, and it didn't set necessarily a conversation that was a team. So I'm not disagreeing with the fact that we have to make sure that we're doing our jobs too. So I'm not disregarding
I just
that.
think there are so many people that are involved in that process.
Yep.
That if they all did what they were supposed to do,
Yep.
these issues would not occur. You have a social worker at these PPTs in many cases, don't you? Or all of them?
Well, it
probably.
depends on the situation. It could be social worker, it could be
There's the person,
psychologist.
too, that is that coordinator, that facilitator between the parent and, listen, I've been through all this, and I know what it's like.
Oh, I know, yep.
And I think Wallingford has come a great, we've really made advances in this whole area. Again, it's how that department is run. You
True.
know, and that person at the helm has to be the one that makes sure that everybody down the pyramid does their job in a way that makes parents feel comfortable, that even though things might not be what the parents want, they have to, you know, that's a very difficult role to play, because everybody's got to follow the law, and sometimes it's not what a parent wants to hear, but that's what they're trained to do.
Correct. Well, they are, and there's always new training and additional training that needs to happen. So I think, again,
I would feel more comfortable, excuse me, I would feel more comfortable as a parent of a special ed student, having one of those people that work with my children or attended that PPT to be the one to talk to me about facilitating, about anything, not the stranger who's a communication specialist.
well, I think, again, I understand what you're saying. I think that there's layers to this, and I think there's layers to continue to improve what we do. Number one, we need to offer, and that's why I mentioned earlier several times that we are looking at different consultants to continue to train our teachers, to continue to train our specialists, and also our administrators. Not just our special ed administrators, but our regular building principals, because things have changed, laws have changed, requirements have changed, statutory language has changed. So we need to continue to do that. In the process, we also need to, and I think this is if there is a gap that I think we need to continue to address, and again, I know we're not alone in this, because I know many of us in this room at the administrative level have had conversations with our colleagues, that there's oftentimes a gap in our ability to assist, and I don't want to use the word train in a negative way, but help parents better understand the process. Because even though you try to do that at a PPT, unfortunately, and you know, you've been there, you're focused so on your child, where you should be, that sometimes the process, you don't even know the process is happening to you. And that's really what happens, because you get so, which you should, you get so involved with making sure your child's needs are being met, that the process happens to you, and then you leave the room and you're like, wait a minute, what just happened? And that's the part that we need to help our parents. We really do need, and it's a challenge, because we could offer these things, and I know we've tried to offer things in the past, but you can't make people come. Like Ms. Raccio said, we offered morning family resource center, we offered during the day family resource center, we offered evening family resource center, and we got, well, when I'm not available this time, that time, well, what time am I offering it? 2 o'clock in the morning? Am I offering it on Sundays, every other Sunday? I don't know. So the thing is, so we could lead a horse to water in some of these circumstances. But the fact is that I think we need to provide them, I think, what we have a responsibility to do, and I do take the words that are being said by everyone very seriously, because we have to increase our ability to lead the people to the water. Because I think that we haven't necessarily done that as well as we could. And I think that's an area of growth in the department, not just special ed, but all of our departments, that we need to be able to continue to reflect on that. There's a lot of resources available that are free that we can access. But again, I don't disagree with either one of you. I agree with both of you. I don't think it's the communication specialist position to do this. I think that person really needs to be truly a communication specialist, doing, you know, the true communication, the tweets, the Facebook, the announcements, the you know, going to those events, doing the pictures, doing all that stuff, being there for a crisis situation. But I also think that there is, on the other side, if you define communication differently, there needs to be at least somebody available to our district to help us grow in that area. It might not be a full-time person, it might not be a part-time person, it might be a consultant. We're looking, we have a meeting actually next week, and then one the following week, looking at outside reading specialists, because a lot of, through the IEEs, the independent educational evaluations, which are now statutorily required, that if a parent requests one, a district has to do it, which is a burden, I have to say, on the part of a district, a significant financial burden, because we don't always, again, it goes back to the whole burden of proof, which is still on the school district. And Connecticut is one of only the very few one of the few states in the country that has that burden. I'm not going to debate the philosophical thing behind it, but the fact is we need to make sure that when our staff are at that meeting and we had an independent eval done, and it's in the area of reading, say for example, that we have somebody there with us that has just as much knowledge as the person who did the evaluation. So we're working in that area. That is, and we're not alone. I know that there are, well, but it is different, but it's a way of approaching the problem that was just discussed.
But that problem should not be existing. That's the way I'm looking at it.
Oh, no, that problem,
I think we have enough people involved.
yeah, I
that
beg to,
there should be,
when it comes to reading, it is a,
I'm not talking
oh,
about reading.
oh, okay,
I'm
all
talking
right.
about the special ed.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I think we have enough people in place where the system shouldn't be broken. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I'm sure Mrs. Levac can agree with me. When we had our children, there were never there weren't that many people involved in the process.
Yeah, but then
Now
there was,
there are so many other people that are in that process to help the process run more smoothly.
And- yeah.
I just know of a case right now of a new child entering the school system, probably special needs. The social worker that has been assigned to this child has made more phone calls to this parent. Talk about facilitating. I mean,
Right.
it's like, it's a feather in our cap that I think we have so many things. The PTAC. I mean, there are just so many things. The book that we mentioned that we give parents about special ed and what steps they could take. Many towns don't do these things.
no, I think we do a lot of great things. I think it's always our responsibility. No, it's always our responsibility to continue to improve. And I think there have been a lot of changes at a very rapid pace over the last 2 to 3 years in special education. Look at when did the district up until last year start talking about an assistive technology team? Because that was another part that we had to come out with. And, it's another responsibility. There's layers upon layers. Never mind, and it comes under special ed, but McKinney-Vento. It's not a special ed law because in the sense that it's not special ed students, but your homeless students.
Wow.
There's layers and layers that go with that we have to continue to revise. I just rewrote the grant for the state, and we have some opportunities there for our district.
I agree there. That's a different thing.
No, but they all kind of, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, they do all meld together because we're growing. And then again, at the time when, 10, 15 years ago, our special ed population was probably 325 students less than it is right now. So staff-wise, you add 300 something, that's a whole school.
Right.
So now, so you have the staffing, and then a lot of our out-of-districts, we want administrators present at our out-of-districts. Because you all know that those sometimes could be, opportunities to engage with the families and engage with the services to make sure that our students are really receiving. So it's nuanced. I'm not disagreeing with either one of you. I just think it's very complicated.
I also think, though, that people confuse 504s with special education. And I think many times, again, if that's spelled out from the beginning, that could arrest many of the issues. I mean, when you look online or on Facebook or whatever, people that complain about these 504s, they always think it's part of the special ed program and it's their job that they should. No, it's not. That's the teacher's job, to make sure the parents understand what a 504 is and what it's meant for. We don't need a communication specialist to help them do that. That's my point. And I think that's a big problem, because I think too many people think it falls under special ed, which it doesn't. And I'll shut up.
Okay, switching gears, Mrs. Purcell.
It's a short question. Could the communication specialist, would you entertain the idea that maybe they would coordinate school calendars, because sometimes you have conflicts from
Yeah.
school to school?
Yep.
And maybe, I think there's money for website design or.
That's in another person's job presently. We wouldn't take that
Okay.
job from that person.
Okay.
So it would be,
know
they
she
could
may have
do,
one, too.
they definitely could, that's part of a assigned duty as part of the
okay.
contract of that person. So
Okay.
we wouldn't take the website away from that individual. But we could do other communications, the Facebook, the Twitter. They could do the calendars. They could do the communications. We do the Ed Connection. Right now, we're triaging that at central office. So we all take a different month or different section. I mean, Karen Bayou she did the last one pretty much her whole self, the Ed Connection. So those are things, the calendar, all of those things are, and we, as you know, we reduced the clerical staff at central office, as I mentioned last week. So that was another, reduction in transfer of responsibilities onto other individuals.
Okay.
We have any other remarks about the strategic plan prioritization?
One more.
Mrs. McKay.
Well, I'm going to stir the pot some more. No, I'm not going to stir the pot anymore. I'm not. I did a good job. I'm happy with what I did. No, I just want to say that
happy with
I'm
what you
really
did.
pleased to see an additional need for a CNA teacher. Because, I mean, for $78,000, this person is going to teach and be there for, how many students are we talking about potentially?
Well, the thing is that this person would be twofold. So this is not necessarily just CNA.
Okay.
We're looking to expand our medical careers offerings.
Okay.
Because right now, and I'm glad you brought this back up, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
2 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because actually, I
'Cause
had a great.
I haven't made my point yet, but
No.
I'll wait.
I had a great conversation with Mr. Corso and Mr. Zacco, is that we have, like, our foods program is a 3-year progression.
Right.
Our, obviously ag science is multi-year progression. When we get to medical careers, really it's only a 2-year progression. And because it is set up the way it is, kids they don't necessarily naturally progress from CNA to the medical careers class that we have. Some of them take it, some of them don't. We believe that by adding this third teacher, we could create a 3-year system, which makes it much more valuable because we could add, like we said, the record keeping. We could add the terminology class. And the terminology class is really key because that's not just for nursing. That's getting kids going into physician's assistants,
Right.
going to doctors. It's even going into some of your.
Well, you could be a transcription
Exactly.
work. I mean,
I was
you
just-
cannot transcribe if you don't understand medical terms.
Exactly.
That's a
So the
bare
thing
minimum.
is that's really where this position, it would allow us if we could open up one more section of CNA, so that would be 10 more students there, but then the other classes could reach an additional at least between 40 and 50 students.
So we're talking about between 50 and 60 students that this individual would have a huge impact on, that a student could potentially, right out of high school, have a job. Period, case closed. Yeah, if they choose not to do anything more but get a high school diploma through this CNA program, they could hit the road running and have skills that they're employable. And I think in today's world, we're hearing it in all aspects, but and both my sons graduated from college, but that's great. But I have pros and cons looking at it in my rearview mirror at this stage in my life. But I do appreciate the fact that we are a very diverse community. And if we can have a portion of our students ready when they graduate from high school, have skills that they can get a job making $18, $20 an hour right out of high school because of the training they received, oh my gosh, that's worth your weight in gold. And it's clear that our students are taking advantage of the CNA program. And if we can build on that, and I didn't even realize that you were looking to enhance it, so that even makes my case stronger. I love that that's number one, and I totally support. I mean, if I had my druthers, that I would remain that as number one. I would put, frankly, the communication specialist as 2, knowing that we're removing all those items towards our 1% or unencumbered funds. This is just me talking, but I think, we have to, again, as stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, we have to be able to say, when we spend their money, where does it actually go? And when you can actually talk about programming that is a tangible program, that our students are walking out of high school with skills that make them employable from day one, that's so valuable in my mind. And I really appreciate that. So I'm in support of that.
Just to kind of make you even more excited, is the fact that with the idea that we're going to be looking to set up pre-apprenticeship programs so CNA, for those of you who might not know this, most of our students take it as juniors.
Right.
The CNA class.
Yeah, I'm aware
and then
of that.
medical careers usually comes as a senior.
Yeah.
So they'll be finishing up at our pinning ceremony this spring. We're hopefully going to be inviting those students to be part of the 3-semester program where it was grant funded through AT&T, where they will be able to actually get a paid apprenticeship in the fall, either outside of school hours or during school hours, depending on how their schedule works, with a local nursing home, local Masonic care, other
Gaylord.
hospitals, Gaylord, all those places,
Right.
which will go towards their next level of certification because they have to have so many clinical hours. So it'll go towards that. So not only are they now going to have the course requirements
Yeah.
and the initial clinical hours to get the certified nursing assistant certificate, I always have to remember those letters, they will actually be working towards their next level of certification
So all
as
the,
students.
it,
So
it just resonates even
it
more.
just takes it to a
I
whole
just
nother
think
level.
that this is an incredibly valuable expenditure of money for a district our size, and a commitment for offering alternative opportunities for our students besides the obvious ones. So I just wanted to make that point too. So I really, really am in support of that as number one.
Any other remarks about the prioritization list?
Are we gonna get a new list with those other pieces taken out?
Yeah, I can do that for you. I might just remove the colors, to be honest.
Yeah,
And
that's
what
a good
I'll do
idea.
is, because the category is there, it already says the name.
Exactly.
So I'll just get rid of the colors. I'll do
Yeah.
it black and white, and I'll give you this. So I won't take the items off. I'll just put zeros and give you the new number. Is that okay? Because I don't want to lose them.
Right.
No.
You know, and then you could refer back.
Okay.
I just made a duplicate copy of the spreadsheet so that I can just change it and not mess up the original.
Don't mess up.
Okay. Mrs. Corso?
Also, if you were to add, if we were to fund these out of, these additional teachers, can you increase the sustained services in the following year to see how that would increase the budget, the percentage of the budget
So
for the following year?
which the CNA teacher
Like the
and
CNA, the communication specialist, did we leave the instructional coaches and the dean of students on the table?
Well, there's still.
Well,
We haven't
we're
gotten there.
we're
We haven't
still
gotten that
looking.
far yet?
You know what I
At
could
least those two?
What I'll do is I can create another document to show those two, and I can add them. So I'll show you variations. So if you do all 4, if you do 3, if you do 2, if you do 1.
Thank you.
It's easy enough. I'll
Yeah.
just do it on a
Thank you.
spreadsheet. That's a really good point.
Because that's increasing our bottom line moving forward.
Exactly.
And I agree, I do agree that the value of graduating high school and able to enter the workforce right away is important. And I don't think kids today are going to college for the same reasons that we went to college for.
I agree with that.
And I also think that kids and adults go back to college at a higher rate than they did years ago. So we don't necessarily have to say for all students that the order is graduate high school, go to college. It could be graduate high school with a certification, work, find value, save money, then go back to college.
I agree with you, Erin, 100%.
And I will remark that having done exactly that path, I can speak personally to it.
And you know what? That's now that is giving our students a roadmap. You know, it's not like, well, what if I take a left here and a right there, and maybe I could go this way? I don't know. I mean, this is a direct roadmap. It's, you know, it's black and white. It's easy to follow if it's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I can speak to the financial piece of the college is, you know, years ago, when your family had an estimated financial contribution on your FAFSA of 0, colleges met that need in terms of grants and scholarships and loans and you know, Pell Grants and things like that. Now kids are getting gapped. So if at a very high rate, so if your estimated family contribution is 0 and the cost of attendance is $30,000 and the college offers you $15,000 in your financial aid package, you're gapped at $15,000 a year. Whereas years ago, there's very few colleges that will meet that full need. So you're gapped, and now what are our kids gonna do? They know they need to spend an additional amount of money on top of, in Parent Plus loans, things like that. It just is becoming very expensive. So the more value we can give to our high school diploma, the better off the more value our diploma becomes.
Agreed.
Mrs. Purcell?
I also very much support this program, but I did have a curriculum question. Will the new things fill buckets, or do they have to do them as electives? And something to think about. Will the new classes, you're talking about medical technology and all those things, will they be things that can fill in some of the buckets?
We
Or
would
do
have
they have
to
to
make
take it as
sure, we'd have to
electives?
make sure that they are connected to state standards, because that's the key thing, is for Connecticut State graduation, I'm learning from Miss Latour, she's proud of me, that in order for it to check off a graduation standard for the state of Connecticut, it has to be based on standards that are considered appropriate. So I'm not sure that they would, there might be elements.
How much, you
Yeah,
know,
some of the
sci-
science.
there
Science.
certainly would be standards aligned to the courses that could align to some of the STEM, to the
Yeah.
STEM bucket.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
Or based on the 6.5, you know, credits they need to take per year to fulfill some of the electives that are just flat out electives that they need to take.
Oh,
So
that's true.
yes,
Okay.
it would
That's
count
true.
towards something.
Okay.
Whether it's a state requirement or a district requirement would be up to how the curriculum is written and how the standards are aligned.
Okay.
You know, I would go so far too, and I don't want to speak for our mayor or our town council, but I think it's a lot easier for the governing bodies that manage and decide what our budget's going to be, when they see programming that is tangible and identifiable and realistic. Yeah, you know, it helps. It would help me if I was on that town council to say why I would be willing to fund something that is got a very specific path, that has specific goals identified for student growth and opportunities for employment. I think that you have to think about. I don't want to speak again for the mayor or town council members, but I'd like to think that that carries some clout in their decision making when they're looking at how they're going to fund us and what they see as value in our budget. I'd like to think that.
All right, so I see it's 8:30. We've spent 2.5 hours on discussion, and that's kind of the end of our timeline that we had in mind for this evening. So I guess for homework, we'll look at our strategic plan prioritization, each of us, and if there's some shifting that you yourself have in mind on bringing something up or down on the list, and we'll get the new printout of the list with things removed and added. We can take that up at the next meeting. Any further comments this evening?
When is our next budget meeting?
Next Wednesday,
The 30th?
the 30th at
Next
6 PM.
Same
and
place, same time.
in the board conference rooms, which is where we are at 100 South Turnpike Road. Is there any public comment at this time?
I just want to thank also Ms. Govan came tonight, because I know there were some board questions about adult education, so I think we answered them, but if you have any additional questions about adult education, I just wanted Ms. Govan, I know she's done a great job. I also want to, just while we're here, acknowledge that one of our teachers was just recognized as Teacher of the Year for adult education for the state. Do you want to just come up and quickly share a little
Yes.
bit on that? You
That's-
came tonight, you might as well.
That's great public comment.
I'm taking all the credit for that. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
One of our teachers, Laurie Ouellette, has been with us for 20 years, and she's taught ESL. Now she's a part of the federal grant, which is Integrated Civics and Career Awareness Training. So she has done very innovative things, and she's brought all the students, up to digital proficiency. So helping them understand all the Google apps and everything, and helping them with resumes. So she was recognized, and it's March 28th at the Mystic Hilton, which is an annual event for an entire Connecticut Adult Association, which is the board called CAACE case. And she's been selected as the Educator of the Year.
Wonderful, that's great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I assume we'll honor her at a board meeting. Thanks.
Yes.
She'll be invited to a board meeting to be recognized, and it'll be in my Monday update come this next week.
All right. Any other public participation or comment? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.